welcome to Decomposing Worm, Doof Media's second worm analysis podcast. That's Clarence. He's the first-time reader and literary expert.
Hello, and that was Matias. He's read the story before.
In this shorter-run series, we'll be using critical theory to analyze the superhero web serial Worm from a broader perspective, shining spotlights and pulling hidden threads of analysis out.
Yeah, so we're going to cover Worm in 6 books, about 300,000 words each, and each will get 2 different episodes of coverage. Today is part 1 of book 1, the overview episode, so we'll stick close to the text.
So this part is going to be closer to the We've Got Worm formula. Today we're covering arcs 1 through 8. If you haven't read arcs 1 through 8 of Worm, please do, because this is going to be a full spoilers discussion. If you don't know what Worm is, it's a fantastic book that totally reconstructs the superhero genre. It's I compared it to what Game of Thrones is to fantasy, Worm is to superheroes. So it's online at parahumans.com, so go and read that. Before we jump into the actual show, let's just talk about what this show is and what we're trying to do here.
Yeah, sort of how we're reconfiguring it.
Yeah, so obviously there is already a very long running series analyzing Worm. It's called We've Got Worm. It's fantastic. If you haven't listened to it, I highly recommend it. Where Scott and Matt, the other members of the Doofcast, go through Worm arc by arc, analyzing it. So I'm a very long time Worm fan. I'm very happy part of Doof Media. I'm the host of another podcast on the network, Do the Right Thing, which is for writers. So of course I'm very interested in this. I really want Clarence to read all of Wildbow's works, but of course Worm is the work if you want to get into the parahumans community, right? You can't really have you can talk about, Twig and Pact and now Pale without having read the other works, but without Worm, you're kind of losing this. I mean, everyone in the community has read it, right? So it kind of becomes harder to talk about if you haven't read that one. But yeah, so Clarence is a fantastic poet and writer, and I mean, I just love hearing him talk. So. Goodness. I'm glad to have you on,
I feel
Clarence.
like every time that I speak to you, you're always singing praises. It's very confusing.
Yes, because you're so cool.
But I'm very excited about this too.
Yeah, I don't know why you agreed to this, because this is going to be so much.
But good work. Good work. It'll be fun.
Fun work. So for the next 3 months, we'll be releasing an episode a week, covering Worm in 6 gigantic books of varying length. They're typically divided into following a certain plot arc. I think readers who have already read it will be able to see what those arcs and more or less agree on where those divisions are. Arcs 1 through 8 are always, a good cutting off point. I think there's basically a lot of people say if you don't like Worm by arc 8, you probably won't like the rest of it. And I think that's pretty fair to say. Although I find it hard to believe anyone wouldn't like the story by arc 8, but whatever. Anyway, we're really excited to do this. As Clarence said, this part is going to be closer to We've Got Worm. It's we'll be going through it very quickly, arc by arc, just covering the most key moments. Although we're probably going to skip over kind of a lot of stuff, just because of time.
We could spend endless hours sitting here talking about it, but
yes. We noticed as we were going through, our script is super long. We're going to see how that goes, and we couldn't figure out what to cut. So we're just going to include all of it and see what happens.
Hurrah! Here we go.
Yes. So of course, if we do skip over some stuff, we're trying to consolidate the discussion of certain points into just talking about it in one moment. So we're going to kind of skim over the bullying at the beginning because we want to talk about it in one moment later on. So stuff like that. So don't get mad at us for skipping over something until the very end when we are sure that we totally skipped over it, right? And of course, next episode will be our perspectives episode, where we're going to write essays and character studies of minor characters and go even more in depth. So there's even more content over there.
Yeah, that's when we'll be kind of pulling everything apart, looking at it differently, I suppose, than the more like
Yes.
traditional.
Yes. I'm really excited for the Perspectives episode.
Me too.
It's a lot of work putting together stuff that people haven't already said 10 different ways. And hopefully you guys will learn some about critical theory at that point.
Hopefully.
So before the final thing before we start going into the more key moment by key moment analysis, Clarence, what did you think of Worm, arcs 1 through 8?
I am very taken with this story. And like even like looking through everything over as we're kind of like, analyzing it, I don't know. I'm just, every time I get more excited about it. And I don't know.
That's great.
It's such a fascinating departure, I suppose, from the like, it's a fascinating departure from the super fast paced and like kind of glossing over a lot of things of superhero of the superhero genre. Yeah, it was very fun.
Yeah, absolutely. I was recommending Worm to someone I think like just yesterday. And the first thing I said was that it was a superhero story, and then they were like, I usually find superhero stories like really like bland and kind of boring, and that is a very fair statement until you read Worm, right?
Yeah.
I think it's kind of the same way of like viewing fantasy as like just Lord of the Ring clones. And there certainly are a ton of those, and some of I mean, if you like it, they're great. But if you don't love Lord of the Rings or that kind of story, you can certainly feel like, okay, I don't want to read about dragons again.
Yeah.
But yeah, Worm is like it's completely different, and we'll be going into that more as we go, obviously. But yeah, I love the story, and I'm hoping Clarence loves it even more as we go. Right?
Yes, hopefully. I'm very excited. I know I've said that like 5 times already, but
yes, I mean it's exciting.
I know. It's just, I don't know. I really like details, and like things that people don't usually think about. And I feel like, particularly from the perspective of Taylor, like we get that so much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I completely agree. Okay, let's get into it, right? We're going to certainly sing more praises as we go. Okay, so we start Arc 1, Gestation, with the bathroom scene. Basically, so we start off with Taylor being anxious about lunch. One of the first lines is, an hour is too long for lunch, which is just, oh man, it flashes back to high school. She is in the bathroom when the trio pours juice over her head, and then we see her power, which has her bugs everywhere. So by the end of this chapter, we learn 2 big things. Taylor wants to be a hero, and that the leader of the trio, Emma, was her best friend. So what did you think of the opening?
It was a very interesting opening, I think. Because like even in the midst of like all of this, this very like emotional and like anxious sort of like scene, we still see her kind of like thinking through very methodically of like how to approach it and what to do. So we kind of like immediately are like jumping into the way that she thinks and the way that she kind of like processes her surroundings, which I think is really interesting because like a lot of times I feel like they're just kind of like figuring it out and, not really like thinking through, I guess, as much of like the logical approach to it.
Yeah. I mean, we even see that just interactions in the classroom. And at the same time, she's also making like a lot of judgments on people. I think we see that from the very beginning.
Yeah.
I mean, from the first scene, Mr. Gladley's Taylor is kind of trying to tear down Mr. Gladley because, he's trying to be a cool teacher and that's not good enough for her.
She has like a very specific way of like justifying her thoughts to herself, and all of like the observations where she's just kind of like stating it where she's like, okay, this is how it is, and so it's all right for me to like feel this way and think this way and like classify these people in these specific, pertaining to like their attributes or like their actions.
Yes. What did you think of Taylor's power?
I think my initial thought was kind of like, how is this going to like be fleshed out? But then I feel like later on, as I kind of saw her in action, it didn't go the way that I thought it was going to. because there was like all these other elements to it besides like just like this control of like singular bugs. It's very like all encompassing, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then it's interesting that she's like very convinced that she wants to be a hero. But she has this kind of like
disgusting power.
Yeah, well, it's also like,
it's very
it's like
unheroic.
Fear, you know?
Yeah.
I don't know. It's a fascinating kind of dissonance, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it's I know the community as a whole has, thought a lot about what Taylor, with her power would be as a hero. And it's always like, I think she'd be really, hamstrung with having to not shove bugs down people's throats, right? But yeah, even from by the end of this arc, we see her, fight Lung, and we kind of see more of what it can do. But even then, it's not like underpowered, but it's not nearly as powerful as it feels later on. Like she uses the bugs to sting and hurt the gang members, right?
Yeah.
And then as soon as Lung, whips out some fire, it's like over.
Yeah, you're kind of like, well, here we are now. It's very it feels smaller than it ends up being.
Yes.
At the beginning.
Mm-hmm. So the next section, Taylor goes home and we see all the prep work she's done, her journal with all her notes, which apparently is like her 4th journal or something like that, and the costume that she made herself. Yeah, that one, it's very interesting because we don't see like the beginning moment of like this superhero montage, which is like all of the, like we don't see the process where she's just kind of like recounting what she has done, like her like planning. And then we're like immediately at the moment where she's like, okay, I'm going to go out and do things. I've already made all the plans. I don't have to worry about like the figuring it out and the origin story and all of this. Which I feel like still kind of like aligns with that. Like we're already in this kind of like progression of like, we're like at the tail end, I guess, of the way that she's of her kind of beginning, which is an interesting place to start. Yeah, this is a whole 3 months after she got her powers. And I'm pretty sure, I mean, all of arcs 1 through 8 is like a month or something like that. Maybe even less.
It's pretty fast, I think.
Yes. So yeah, we don't see the spider bite. I mean, we later learn obviously what it is, but we don't see it on screen. And I think this is kind of a ahead of its time invention. Like I know Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse like also has this kind of thing. I mean, we see Miles Morales get the spider bite, but all the other, Spider-Verses we kind of skip through that because it's like, okay, we get it. We know what an origin story is. We know what it's like to start figuring out the power, all the testing and stuff, even though that's always super fun. But yeah, I also wonder if Wildbow, there's the rule that you're supposed to really start as close to the action as possible, as close to the end as possible. And maybe Wildbow had been thinking about, this is all the testing and stuff that, you can do. Like it would be much more like methodical, I guess, and in terms of like action. Mm-hmm. And we could just skip over all of that and get to this. Yeah. To her first night out. So yeah, I think this is where we first start seeing how this book is going to subvert a lot of genre expectations. I mean, that already happened with the bugs, but even still. Yeah. So then Taylor goes and fights Lung, and she nearly dies until a group of mysterious teenage supervillains, who we'll later learn are the Undersiders, save her. Then Armsmaster comes to take Lung away, and everyone mistakes Taylor for a villain. Yes, this is an interesting beginning of action because she's not like seeking one particular, like she doesn't have like one specific person that she's like going to fight. She kind of like heads out and is like, I'm going to fight whoever I come across, I suppose, or not necessarily. I mean, but I guess what I mean to say is that she doesn't have like a particular like tale of vengeance or like that sort of thing. I mean, she certainly doesn't have a nemesis. Yeah. Or she's not like actively seeking to kind of like she doesn't have like a specific tangible goal, I guess. She's kind of like, I'm out to be a hero. Yeah. And I mean, obviously she does have some, particular people she hates, but they're unpowered, right? The trio is not. Until the very end of this book, right? They are just humans, and she never. We'll go through, and as she more and more justifies violence against them, but especially this first half of the story, she certainly doesn't let herself even think about using her power on them.
Yeah, because she has that thought like on the way back of like this is like a thing of she's like accumulating a list of reasons.
Yes,
but then she's kind of like, oh well, I'll just put that away and like not think about that.
Yes. Another thing I noticed in this on this read through, we don't really see a lot of like normal powered normal like cape on unpowered like crime stopping, crime fighting. Obviously we're most of the story is told through this perspective of a villain, right? But she goes on this first night, she stops that gang, and then she's immediately in a powered fight, and I think the only time we see like a powered person taking down an unpowered criminal is like the interlude in Arc 2 with Victoria and Amy, and I think that's just like a interesting reversal of that, or not reversal, but an interesting take on that trope of like all heroes start off fighting the unpowered, and in this world that's not really the case. Yeah, it seems like it's that kind of like dynamic of like later on the whole like cops and robbers, like it's not there's like two different levels, and the like non-power we don't even acknowledge, I suppose. It's like already established that there's this kind of back and forth. Yeah, like they do, but it's not even really worth mentioning. Much later we see villains kind of like wiping the floor with the unpowered if they're unassisted. So so then we get our first interlude at the end of Arc 1. It's from Danny's perspective. I'm going to kind of skip over Danny because we're really going to focus on talking about him closer to the end, and my character study next week is going to be about him. So that's where I'll talk more about him. But Danny's really worrying about her. He's afraid of pushing her. And in this one, we get a lot of world building. Well, also like as like a first mentioning of like the interludes, I really like this as like a writing aspect to it, of like because there's so much that we get to see. I mean, we see a lot with Taylor, but like it's a whole nother sort of experience, I guess, kind of sitting in all these other people's heads. I don't know. I really like that in terms of like moving from arc to arc, having these kind of like moments where we like step outside of the main, progression. Yeah, it's interesting. I remember my first read through, and I know other people experience this, kind of getting annoyed at interludes because I was like, I want to get back to the story, right? I was blitzing through it. Yeah. But on every single reread, all of the interludes have been my favorite moments that I always look forward to, and I'm always excited about. In this one, so the world building has first the first parahuman Scion appeared, and then powered people kind of happen everywhere. This golden age of parahumans, when they first started showing up, ends when the first like costumed hero dies in a sports game riot. And then there's this quote here, and I think it's kind of emblematic of what Worm is to the superhero genre, is the golden age of the parahumans was thus short-lived. They were not the deific figures they had appeared to be. Parahumans were, after all, people with powers, and people are flawed at their core. Yes. And I think, so Worm is kind of, that's almost like the thesis of like, hey, in this world, parahumans, or superheroes, are people with powers. They're not Superman. Yeah. Right? There's not this, there's enough of a connection between like parahumans and humans that there isn't that sort of otherworldly sort of separation, I think. But then there's these other ones that like appear, like Scion and like later, like the Endbringer. I don't know. There's an interesting sort of like leveling, I guess, and like stratification, I guess. Okay. Between all of the different ones, because I mean, like later on, there's some that are like set apart, like physically, like in their like physicality and like the material, where they like don't like blend in
with everybody else. Or like they don't remember who they are before. I don't know. They're just like...
Right, the case 53s. Yes.
Yeah.
That's another difference, yeah. As we go through, even from the beginning, we kind of see that this world is more complicated than it seems on first glance. Very quickly, I want to compare Scion to Superman because there's a utilitarian trope of an argument, basically, of utilitarianism looks at Superman and is like, well, that's great that he's stopping crime, but what he should do is, if he's on super fast and super strong, he should be either saving everyone constantly, or he should be powering a generator or something like that. He should be doing something more useful with his time, right? And as in this, we kind of see that Scion is kind of that. He's constantly in this chapter where I think the quote is something like, in 30 years he has not stopped, or something like that. I just think that's a
that's interesting.
I think, isn't it the term XP, I think, where you take a character from another story and you put it in a different story and kind of see how it works in a different context. So then we have Arc 2, Insinuation. I think the summary for this is in which Taylor becomes a fake villain. So we see some more bullying. Mr. Gladly approaches her and asks if she wants help, but doesn't really try very hard. And Emma brings up Taylor's mom's death, and she flees from the school.
Yes. I have more to say about the apathy of Mr. Gladly, when we talk about all of the bullying and everything. But I think this is the moment where I could see how much of her reasoning, the flaws in her reasoning, where she's she doesn't really believe in the school authority, but she still is buying into the kind of more larger governmental body of with Armsmaster and everything. I don't know. It's just it kind of confused me, but at the same point I was there's not necessarily an immediate correlation, especially someone who especially if she's compartmentalizing of this is school, this is here at work.
Yeah, I think so. She hates school authority here, but she does trust the heroes as a good organization, right? Yeah. And I think by the end of this book, by the end of Arc 8, that kind of falls apart too, and she just kind of hates all authority at that point.
Yeah, we kind of see that progression as it slowly kind of deteriorates.
So then Taylor is offered to join the Undersiders, and she decides to join as a totally undercover cop.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, she does a lot of justifying to herself of if I'm going to, buy in, if I'm going to join them, then I'll have this kind of backup sort of thing. Whereas I'll be, running this long con, all of this. But it's kind of what I was saying before, where she builds up these sort of arguments for herself to kind of justify her decision making. When also there's the added element of being asked to join this group and being accepted in this kind of friendship capacity. Yeah,
it's clear from basically the moment she starts talking to them that the fact that they're not, ignoring her, sneering at her, contributing to her bullying is already enough for her to like them and be interested in them. And then the moment that she's in the loft, she's fascinated with them.
That's very interesting. It's also if you've been living for multiple years where there isn't that sort of acknowledgement, the social acknowledgement, we need that, so I feel it's not unreasonable at all. It's totally understandable for her to be this acceptance is something that I have been seeking, and I know it doesn't necessarily align with my whole plan of becoming a hero, but if I gather this intel, I can still kind of be part of something.
Yeah. In the notes, I'm not sure if you said it on air yet, but you started using the words compartmentalization and rationalization.
Yes.
And I find that fascinating because I really don't think I used those words with you.
I don't think you did.
And I think rationalization does show up in the text, but compartmentalization, I don't think shows up at all in these arcs. What I'm getting at is We've Got Worm focused a lot on that term, and I just found it really interesting that you, Kate, like you recognize that just as they did, and I think that's just really interesting.
Yeah, well, I feel like Taylor, like, really, she, like, wants to have control over things. And, like, that's just kind of, like, her way of creating that, is kind of, like, placing things into, like, you know, kind of reasoning it out and being like, okay, this is where this goes, and this is where this goes, sort of thing. Yeah.
So the arc 2 ends with interlude with Victoria and Amy. They are part of the new wave heroes, so they're unmasked. And Victoria is interrogating a Nazi and injures him, and Amy shows up to fix her mistake.
Yes, this was interesting because both of them are like teen age, which I mean, this is also like it extends to Taylor and the Undersiders too. Of like like they're still building their kind of like their own moral principle. Like they're still coming to their own conclusions about what they think is right and wrong, and like, you know, where that like moral, you know, gray line, I suppose, is. And I think this like very particular moment with these two, who are both like heroic, and they're both like visible, right? Because they're unmasked at this point, correct? Yes. Okay, yeah, I thought so. But they're still kind of like using this like manipulation of like, you know, like threat and torture, and, you know, like this sort of, I mean, it's not really like, you know, a grand sort of, I mean, even if it is like this, like, Nazi, it was a skinhead, I think, right?
Yes.
But it's just like, regardless of who the subject is, like they're still utilizing violence and manipulation in order to like extract information.
Right.
Which,
and they're teenagers.
Yeah.
They're teenagers. Like, I don't know. It's interesting because it's like the text is really saying, yes, this skinhead did, you know, horrifically participate in a horrific act of racial violence to a black woman, and probably like deserves stuff against them, right?
Course,
so it's like he definitely deserves, you know, whatever's coming to him. But should teenagers be the one to dispense that kind of justice?
Yeah, who are kind of like exacting that punishment.
Yeah. And I think there's some other setup here too. Victoria and Amy are part of New Wave. They're supposed to be unmasked to be accountable. But it's kind of really clear from this that they aren't accountable, because Amy just clears up the mistake. And you know, the skinhead's not going to go and charge them with anything. And even if they did, her mom's a lawyer. So, yeah.
Yeah.
So then we start arc 3, Agitation, in which a bank is robbed. So we start off with Taylor jogging to the boardwalk to meet Brian, and Taylor describes a lot of the city. It's run down, an industrial golden age is long gone, and the remnants are the poor and abandoned infrastructure.
Yeah, and this kind of run, and a lot of her like observations about the city in general is like she really kind of knows the like layout of it, and she like she recognizes the kind of visible inequality and like the dysfunction, and, you know, that kind of rundown of like things not working. Like she's very aware of that, which, I mean, in terms of like her, you know, more like altruistic reasons of becoming a cape and like entering into this like hero capacity is, I mean, we see it like where she's kind of, you know, making all these observations, and like where like her father, like even with Danny, he's like very he was working on getting the ferry up and running again, right? Yeah, so it's kind of like she's much more like aware of it, I guess. I don't know. So then it makes like us aware of it, but then other people aren't necessarily acknowledging it, which I don't know. I thought it was just like an interesting kind of beginning.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a lot in this first book about class and power. I mean, like there's some, like, just looking at the positions of various characters, right? Taylor's dad is a union leader. The heroes are generally aligned with the upper class, right? We have Victoria's mom is a lawyer, so is Emma's mom, or Emma's dad, my bad.
Yeah.
And they're probably, protecting these richer areas a little bit more often. The boardwalk, employs like enforcers to keep out.
Where they're just kind of like,
mm-hmm.
they don't get called out whenever they exact violence.
Yes.
I mean, later on we see that with Lisa's interlude, right, where it's just kind of like they're not going to get called out. They're not going to get called out on it. So there isn't any sort of like accountability for it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And just as another point, right, in Arc 6, right, the Undersiders crash a fancy, gala,
mm-hmm.
right, that is basically thrown like for the heroes with the rich, right? So it's like there's some pretty clear alignments here. So I'm just like pointing out these things. So if someone did want to write an essay about class and worm, I think it's very doable.
Yeah, absolutely.
So then they decide to rob a bank. They bring up their plans within 3 hours.
That was so fast. I feel like I didn't expect it to be quite so fast.
Yeah. It was... Yeah, they're basically like, we're going to go in there, we'll take the money, and they had a plan for how they're going to leave. That's basically the extent of the plan.
Yeah.
Their explanation is that it's a robbery, not a heist. So no need to like look at air vents or whatever.
Oh my gosh.
So Taylor tries to get the okay from Armsmaster, and on the way to the bank, Taylor talks to Lisa about the cops and robbers.
Yes, and I want to bring that up, but later, because there's much to be said about that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We had a listener question, so we'll dive into it at the end. Yes.
Yes. Oh yeah. Well, it was a really just like the beginning, like the argument that happens beforehand, and kind of like they're kind of entering into this space. Kind of. I mean, not as like it's not totally haphazardly, but like it's definitely like fast. We get like a really good glimpse of like the dynamics of the group immediately, where there's not really like necessarily a leader. Like I guess Brian is like very like he's more of like a visible embodiment of leader, but like he doesn't hold this kind of like absolute power, because Lisa also has all this information, and she's kind of like this link to whoever it is, I mean, at this point we don't know it's Coyle, but it's like she has that sort of like authority.
Right.
And then I don't know, at this point I hadn't quite figured out Regent and like how he fit, because he's like fairly chaotic until like later on to me. I don't know. But yes, so it was kind of like all of this trying to figure everybody out, and then Taylor seemed she held more power than I thought she would, because she was just kind of like observing, and suddenly everyone's like, well, what are you thinking? And then she ends up being kind of like one of the final voices.
Right. Which
I think was an interesting like immediate kind of jump into like a semblance of power, I guess, within the group. Yeah.
I think, by trying to include her, she's suddenly given more power than she's been given in a long while. So then they rob the bank. And the main event here is that a fight occurs between the wards and the Undersiders.
Yes, there. As this occurs, like there's an interesting moment to observe with Taylor, because when she's like immediately like, okay, if we're going to have hostages, if I need to keep them quiet and out of the way, she has this line about that where she's like, I'm willing to terrorize them. Where it's interesting that she like immediately is like, I'm going to use terror as a deterrent, to kind of create docility in order to prevent more violence, but like it's still like this threat of violence instead of I don't know. It was just it's very like I don't know. It doesn't seem very heroic to me, I guess.
Yeah.
Like
yes. She views fear as better than outright violence.
Yeah.
So there's two things I want to point out there. One, she's not just threatening violence, like pain. She's threatening death, because a Black Widow will kill you. So she has 5 Black Widows on all these people. So it's like they have 5 guns pointed at them.
Like it's kind of a lot.
Yeah. And she has total control. So it's not like, with a gun, it's kind of like, oh no, what? It's not just, they could kill me. It's like they could do by accident.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's at least one, person in there that like cries, and that's super valid. And the other thing is Taylor's power is almost always just plain horrifying to experience. We see that with Clockblocker, who has bugs inside his mouth when he freezes them all. So when they unfreeze, they're all going to crawl out his mouth one by one.
Yeah.
Jesus Christ, Taylor.
It's quite the visual.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's also with that terror that she has, she is very like controlled like in that. Because like what you were saying before about like the difference between like the spiders and like the unpredictability of a gun is that it's not, her power is very exact. Which it fits very well with her. And it's also, I was surprised like how capable she was like in the fight. Like she was very aware of what was going on and like kind of reading everything, like reading kind of like the scope of the battle, or not battle I suppose, but like the fight as it was progressing, which I feel like there's usually like more like chaos, I guess, when I think of like the visuals of fights, but she's very like aware of what's happening, kind of like that, the changing dynamics of it, which is very interesting just in terms of like her fighting ability.
Yeah. I think it would be very easy to write a whole essay on just how Wildbow is writing fight scenes in Worm.
Oh my gosh. Yes.
You know, maybe we will in a future Perspectives episode. So the next beat here is Glory Girl crashes through the building, and we realize that Amy has been here this whole time, and Tattletale and Taylor have to kind of outsmart them, and they're kind of cruel here.
They are, and it's in a way that it's like there is that manipulation again, but like it's not necessarily like physical violence anymore, because I mean it's Tattletale, and Taylor's kind of like just like. And not just, but yeah, she's kind of, you know, backing her up. But like, we see that kind of the violence that like words hold, and we see that later as well. But like this kind of like power of revealing knowledge, and kind of like the violent after effects of that.
Yeah, definitely.
But like in a very like intimate, like interpersonal way. Which is a totally different dynamic of like physical violence. Yeah.
I think that's definitely worth examining in the future.
Yes.
So Arc 3 finishes with the interlude with the wards. So they break down the fight, and in the process pick Taylor's cape name, Skitter. And also Amy has a talk with Gallant.
Yeah, this one, it was really interesting because we got to see, even more so than like the interlude with Amy and Victoria, right? That was what happened. Okay, sorry. Is that we see kind of like all of the like assumptions that Taylor has made about heroes and about capes, about like their inherent like morality, I guess, and like you know, kind of altruistic reasons for doing good. Gets kind of like deconstructed, and we see kind of like the messiness, I guess, of these teenagers who have been thrust into this like into the public eye and into this expectation of being good and like doing like, you know, civic justice and such. But at the same time, we kind of like see this very like almost this kind of lack of awareness in terms of like the collateral damages.
Yeah.
Which there's like a whole nother side of like collateral damages and like how Wildbow like depicts that later on. But in this particular moment, it's like we kind of see the arrogance of this kind of like hero work that these individuals are, you know, contributing, I guess.
Yeah, they feel empowered and entitled to use their powers as they see fit, right? Kidwin pulls out his giant cannon, and like that. I think that's probably what does the most damage on the hero side, other than Glory Girl smashing through and like just to be dramatic, smashing a table.
This one, there's not quite as much like in the aftermath of the bank robbery. It's more of like them not thinking about it, I guess.
Right. Yeah, they're too busy fighting villains. Who cares if the street gets ripped up or a car gets destroyed or whatever? There are bigger things at stake. They might get away. Yeah. Did you want to talk about the love triangle?
I did, but I haven't fully thought it out.
Okay. So then we have Arc 4, Shell, in which Bakuda explodes a lot of stuff. I think this arc is kind of where the story starts to feel real, and the tone of the later parts of the book start coming in.
Yeah, there's a distinct shift here. Because before it's kind of like they're all, Taylor's figuring out where she's like fitting in, what she's doing, and then now it's kind of like there is that seriousness to it. And then also there's some of the like inhibitions of like that Taylor has set up for herself to prevent her from like kind of indulging her those like violent thoughts that she kind of like brushed away before. She kind of like stops. She's like beginning to stop brushing them away as much.
Yeah. So the arc starts off with the Undersiders bonding over shopping and fugly bobs. So first, Lisa is kind of trying to help Taylor out. They're shopping together for clothes. It's like a really nice like friendship scene, but they're both kind of like pushing against each other.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one in terms of like when you think about what we were talking about before, where like Taylor's like this is the first moment in a while that she's like had the opportunity to kind of like feel out friendship, I guess, again. Because like her friendship with Emma kind of like that, I suppose you could say like her like friendship muscle has kind of atrophied a bit, because like the loss of like Emma as a friend and like that like close intimacy, I guess, of like a best friendship having been lost and like having kind of been broken. I think this particular moment I think is even more like poignant, because she's kind of beginning to lower her defenses.
Yeah. I mean, the only other friend she's had since she started high school was like one person who then stopped after the locker incident. Speaking of, that is the next section. So they at Fugly Bob's, which is such a fun location.
It is.
I don't know. It's not like super fascinating. It's just nice. And I really wish we saw more of it through these arcs of just them hanging out like this. So they start talking about trigger events, and we kind of get revealed that it's bad for everyone. I actually really, there's a lot of characterization of Alec here, more than in other parts of the book. This is one of my favorite scenes of the first half.
Yeah. It's very interesting, I suppose, too, in terms of like that is kind of like an expected conversation to happen of like, oh, how did you get your power? But then it's like, most of them are like very traumatic moments,
right?
That I feel like just kind of like immediately opening up to that when you meet someone else seems, I don't know, it seems like such an open vulnerability.
And it seems so like it's interesting because it's like if every trigger event is traumatic, then like that every parahuman has experienced something horrible. You might not know what it is, but you can see that they've experienced it, right? Well, you might not. Most other mental traumas are not so visible.
Yeah, that is really interesting, of like the visibility of like your past, I guess, and, like your experiences, particularly of like, especially the ones that like can't, the case 53s.
Right.
Yeah.
Did you want to say anything about the locker incident?
Oh, yes. Mostly that I was horrified.
Yeah.
And then also like later on, rereading it like after I had read through the whole up like through Arc 8, I was like, it was worse knowing who Sophia was.
Yeah.
It was just so disheartening, I guess, the like cruelty that was by such young people.
Yeah. To compare it to another locker room scene in Carrie, right? Which this book, it makes at least one reference to. Carrie, has a horrible incident at the start of her story where she gets her period, and all the girls in locker room like throw tampons at her.
Yeah.
Or pads, I think. Like chanting, plug it up," which is like,
oh my God.
Like she didn't know what was going on. She thought she was like dying.
Yeah.
And I think this is just like something comparable. I don't know if it's an intentional illusion, but it's like, it's an event like that is worse in other ways. Taylor doesn't, she's not experiencing her first period and thinks that she's dying, but she's shoved into a locker full of rotting.
Yeah, it's
yeah.
It's such it's very like a viscerally like painful
mm-hmm.
imagining. It's very like, I don't know. I'm a very like naive person, I think.
Sure.
Because I don't know, just the cruelty of others is just so astoundingly disappointing to me every time.
Yeah. I think another significant thing here is that Taylor just really wants to talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
She like questions why she brought it up, and like she just that's why she just needs to talk about this with someone. And I think it's not very likely. I think it's not said in the text, but it's a fact that she has never talked about the true like horror of this. She didn't talk about it with her dad, and she's never had an opportunity to talk about it with anyone else. So this is the first time in 3 months that she's talked about this horrible, horrible thing that was done to her.
It's this sort of like cathartic kind of thing.
Yeah.
There's something to be said about like the kind of like writing out or like speaking as this sort of like unburdening.
Mm-hmm.
Where I know there's like all these like research, there's all this, science research or whatever, I don't know, some like brain stuff. Where it's like if you write out like you write out the list and you're kind of like clearing up space in your mind, which I feel like this is kind of that moment for her where it's like she's been sitting here like chewing on this and kind of having to deal with this by herself for 3 months, you know what I mean? And now she's kind of like clearing up the space to like be able to kind of like process it.
Yeah.
I guess more than just kind of remaining silent and like carrying it around.
Yeah. Although I think she ends up dealing with it in not so productive ways.
No, it's definitely she didn't process it necessarily fully, healthily, but
yes.
I mean, who has time to process things correctly?
I mean, there's a bombing spree going on across the city.
Yeah,
it's fair. Speaking of, so they think that someone has stolen their money and bitch is missing.
Mm-hmm.
The Undersiders are then confronted by Uber and Leet before Bakuda reveals herself.
Yes.
I think if you want to just skip over to the Uber and Leet bit rather than talking about Regent blaming bitch, and we'll talk about that later.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Uber and Leet are they're kind of silly, I guess. I know you mentioned this, but like I feel like that you see them because like they've got their video going and all of this, and it's kind of we're as the reader we're kind of this like we're kind of on the sidelines as the Undersiders are kind of making fun of them and all of this in this kind of like Richard III sort of way of like when he does all these asides, and like since we're the audience, like we have to sit there and listen, and by listening we're kind of like in cahoots or whatever with him.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of that same sort of moment of like, I mean, we're on the side of the Undersiders because like we're on Taylor's side, right? But then I don't know, there is this sort of kind of, I don't know, cruelty, I guess, but not in like a, I mean, I should say it's not in a serious sort of way, but it's...
No, I definitely think that the Undersiders are being a bit cruel here. At the very least, they are being bullies, right?
Yeah.
They're bullying them for being nerds. Like, I get that they're like antagonists in this, but we'll talk about this more once at the point where it's revealed that the Undersiders are actually villains.
Yeah.
But yeah, they're not great people here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's such like a tonal shift.
Yes. Especially between this and Bakuda's appearance and what that means. yeah, so she shows up, and revealing that there's actually a ton of ABB gang members in the area. They're kind of the Undersiders kind of get held at gunpoint, and then Bakuda reveals she's placed bombs in everyone, and she melts someone. She melts Park Jihu, which I've memorized his name after reading the story so many times. So they are then led through they are chased by bombs through these cargo containers. They brush with death at least like 3 or 4 times. And then Taylor commits her second act of disfigurement by chopping off Bakuda's toes.
Ah, yes, the toe. The whole like mutilation thing, these like disfigurations, is like a very interesting, tendency, I guess, that she has starting to develop.
Yes.
Especially because like, just when you think about it, like symbolically, mutilation, it can hold like different sorts of, meanings, I suppose, but particularly with Taylor, I feel like she uses it as this sort of like exacting of control over whoever she's fighting. It's not like I don't like necessarily want, it's not a trophy. It's like a utilitarian sort of, this is what I need to do in order to like incapacitate this, enemy for a longer period of time than like a prolonged period of time, I guess.
Yeah. As a small bit here, I think this is a really interesting feature of Worm's world that almost never do people just like get knocked out, right? In any other superhero story, people get knocked out all the time, right? A good punch to the head at the end of a fight and they're out, and that's the end, right?
Yeah.
But in Worm, that can occasionally happen, but more often people like get stunned or like really injured, or incapacitated in some way. And sometimes the only way to end the fight is to disfigure, as we see with Lung later on.
Yeah.
So it's a lot more physical, and it's less. The fights have to end with a harder hit in a more permanent solution every time.
Yeah, it is this sort of like the permanent violence against. It's also, I suppose, it's interesting too because for parahumans, it's like their ability to fight is very reliant upon their body. Even like just like even ones that like use other things that like they've built or like that sort of thing. There is this like return to like the physicality because they have changed. Because they've had this like moment of, this like trigger event, they've become something more, I guess, or other, I don't know.
Yeah.
There is like a larger reliance on their body. So I feel like, in order to stop fighting and like kind of, I guess like the like desecration of like their materiality is it's very prevalent, I suppose, but I don't know, there's something to be said about it, but I haven't fully thought it out yet. I still want to chew on it because I feel like there's more to think about, especially with like the varied levels of what I was talking about before of like how much someone has changed, like as they have become a parahuman, like
right. Yeah, as a small thing, comparing it to other, superhero genres, almost every other superhero gets like enhanced durability. Like if not textually through their power, they definitely have it from, just by the fact of being in a comic book universe. Like Batman is not as durable as a normal human being at all. Yeah. Even though he's supposed to be, and stuff like that. In Worm, even if your power is physical, even if you like clock blocker, you have to touch someone for it to work. You are still, your body's still a human being. It's still just as vulnerable. So the ending of Arc 4 is we have 2 interludes. First is Kaden. She's a sympathetic Nazi. Yes, this one was really interesting. It was disconcerting. That's what. It's disconcerting, because
the language that she uses, like the language she uses to explain her actions is like vague enough that she doesn't completely like articulate the underlying like racist ideology of it.
Right.
Which, you know, like this whole like keeping the city safe, putting bad guys away, all of this, like she doesn't explain to herself who she deems the bad guys and like how she keeps the city safe. And those kind of like gaps, I think, are very dangerous in terms of like just language and the way that language is used. Yeah.
Did you want to talk about this more in your character analysis? Okay.
Yes.
Then you could just say that.
Yeah, I want to talk later about all of this. Perhaps I feel like in my character study. Yes.
Do you want to just say that? Like
yes. Okay, hold on.
Okay, you're okay.
Wait, set it up again.
You told me you had a lot to say about this, but I think you're saving it more for your character study.
I am, yes. I want to kind of linger on Kaden later on in my character study for next week.
Yes. The next interlude is from the perspective of Brutus, one of Rachel's dogs, and he is a good boy.
He is. This was a fun writing style shift. I mean, the content of it was obviously like very heavy, but I think reading it from one of Rachel's dogs instead of like from her perspective, I think is a similar sort of sense of like when we're reading it from a child's perspective or from like an outsider's perspective of we see things that we would not ordinarily see if we're being presented the scene from the character that is like being watched. Yeah.
I also think this is just a really important bit of characterization and and a opportunity for us to empathize with Rachel. We see that she doesn't relate to humans very well. You know, she hurts a little girl.
Yeah.
But she cares deeply for dogs. And I think the first time I read this in the aftermath of taking down the dogfighting ring, Rachel is sitting amongst dog blood and, you know, bodies. And she's just like holding Brutus, who doesn't understand what's going on. And yeah, I think it really upset me the first time I read it.
Yeah.
It's a deeper moment of vulnerability than we've seen from basically any of the Undersiders.
Yeah. I think that's why I was immediately taken with Rachel, is because I absolutely love her. And I think like these sorts of moments, like specifically this moment, I just like, you could feel like how much she felt. Like, I don't even know if I can particularly, you know, illuminate that within like the linguistic bounds, but like just this kind of, she's much like she holds all of this like within her so much, and like, and we don't see it because she has all these kind of like, you know, exterior kind of like boundaries that she set up, but I don't know, it was a very wonderful scene.
Yes. All right, so Arc 5, Hive, in which Brockton Bay wars against the ABB. So we start off with Somers Rock, the villain bar, and we're introduced to many of Brockton Bay's villains who are convening to talk about the ABB, who are now on a bombing spree across the city.
Yeah, and the kind of like meeting up of everybody with this like this whole interaction of like we see all of them and we kind of see Taylor's like identifying of everyone. All the kind of like posturing and silent plotting that's happening behind the scenes, is even as everyone's like, okay, we have to like get together and like keep the status quo. It's this kind of like interesting like balancing act, I guess. Which I have more to say about the status quo later, because yes, but just kind of this idea of like creating a truce between everybody in order to deal with someone who's like stepping outside of that is an interesting, not interesting, it's a notable precedent to make. Yeah.
Just for fun, who do you find the most interesting here? We see most of them as we go through these 8 arcs, but I think you don't see like almost anything from the Travelers.
Yeah.
So they're the most mysterious, but also There's Fault Line's crew, and so there's a lot of interesting people here.
There are. I don't know if I had anyone stick out particularly. I was more interested, I guess, in kind of how people like were responding, and also like how the Undersiders like set themselves up like physically.
Yeah. Yes.
That kind of construction, and that was their behavior within like in the villain bar versus like right outside of it afterwards.
Right.
That kind of shift in dynamic, I think. That was what I was paying attention to more so.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So in the next key moment, Taylor attempts to deal with some bullies. So she ends up punching Emma at the mall, mostly because of her concussion, allegedly. Mm-hmm. But I also kind of see it as like her inhibitions toward violence are already really lowered.
Yeah. Because she's already kind of like, she's kind of like been chipping away at that kind of like wall that she's built up for herself just by joining the Undersiders. And then like now with this concussion, she's kind of like, you know what? It's like, I'm already kind of like in flux,
mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
the next...
sorry, keep going.
Okay. So she finally opens up to her dad about what's been going on. And they set up the school meeting, which to me is probably the most significant moment in at least the first half of this book.
Yeah.
If not this entire book. So she goes to meet with it's a parent teacher meeting. The principal's there, some of her teachers, and her bullies and their parents are here, and she loses this fight really hard, and it's kind of utterly awful. I've read this chapter at least like on 5 like separate like distinct occasions, like at least months and months apart. It has never failed to make me like pacingly mad. I was listening to the audiobook for this while I was cooking, and I had to turn everything off and just like so I could pace for the rest of the chapter, so I wouldn't like angrily flip a pancake or whatever. It's the injustice here, and like the indignation is just
that's a good word, like the indignation of it.
Mm-hmm.
Is because the whole time it's just so frustrating just watching this kind of, no matter the amount of like proof or like her testimony, like it's just she's fighting against something that she can't win by herself. I don't know, it's just it's so disheartening to watch. Do
you want to talk about the betrayal, the loss of friendship?
Oh yes,
stuff?
yes. So we particularly in the dynamic between like, I mean, we saw this before when she was like when Taylor was so upset at Emma, like with bringing up her mother and like the death of her mother, when they were kind of like in the hallway earlier on. But I feel like this, like the loss of friendship particularly, is something that we don't see as often kind of explored in like literature in general and like media as like romantic love. But I feel like
especially a friendship that doesn't get back together by the end of the story.
Is it this is completely lost, and like we know that it's not ever going to be kind of patched up even in like an acquaintance sort of way. Like there's like such profound pain, like that it has cut so deeply, and it's so like it's wrapped up also within this sort of like the loss of Taylor's mother not at the same time, but like because there was such like a sharing and like intimacy, I guess, between them, as she was kind of like processing that the idyllic image of childhood has like been kind of poisoned by who her friend has like become and what she has done afterwards. Kind of like if there's like a bad ending to a book, even if you love the beginning part, like you're never going to love it again, because you know
Right.
what it's leading to.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know. It's just very painful.
Yeah. I think Wildbow is really looking directly at this cruelty in schools, which is like really real. And in most young adult that I've read, it's either not a topic, which, I mean, not every story has to be about that, but there's a lot of stories that are set in schools where it's either not a topic or it's set to a pretty like obvious good versus bad. Like the bullies are bad, or they're, misunderstood and they just need a redemption arc or whatever. But rarely do the antagonists like start as a good friend and turn bad.
Yeah.
Unless they're like the main character or something. So yeah, Emma isn't just a bully; she's a friend turned bully, and it's so much worse.
Because it's not just like she's not a bully who's just kind of exact. Like it's not about her trying to deal with her own insecurity, like fully just her kind of like choosing whoever. It's just like that flip, I suppose, I think is what makes it so horrible. Because I don't know, because of that like past.
Yeah. And there is a lot of media that does like show bullying and stuff like that, but this just feels so much more real than a lot of those. It feels more personal. Like, I don't know, a lot of media just shows like, physical stuff or pretty kind of, like tropey and obvious bullying, making fun of appearances or sexuality and things like that. Not that those at all are, minor. Those are very serious, but just the specificity of this kind of targeted bullying is something I don't see super often. So at the end of this meeting, we just, authority truly fails her, and it proves to her that she was right. Going to school would do nothing. And despite Danny, doing a pretty good job of, being a parent here, of, supporting her at the very least, it's just not enough in the face of all this. So what does Taylor do to cope? She goes out to fight villains, to not even fight villains. She just joins in to fight people. Because violence is her best coping mechanism. And what I think is really brilliant about this is that coming off of this school meeting, we're just as amped up as she is. When we're like, fuck yeah, I want to kick some parahuman heads in. But of course it's like completely misdirected.
She does that a lot, of like kind of this transference, I suppose, of her anger and like her frustration. But in terms of like using violence as like a coping mechanism, there's an interesting kind of like correlation, I suppose, of like kind of the way that she uses like control over like her body to kind of control her emotions and like her thoughts. Because like we see this before where it's like how like meticulously she plans everything out, and like how she does all this running and like this kind of honing of her like physical form, even if she doesn't necessarily acknowledge, I suppose, like the reasons, or like the underlying reasons, I guess, of like why she kind of lets that kind of like control over her like physicality dictate her her feeling of control, like just in terms of like her mind. Which I feel like that's kind of why she turns to like mutilation, particularly like like taking that control like over somebody else's body. As kind of like a way of like kind of setting her environment in that same sort of like control.
So then she goes off to fight the ABB with she's joined with Bitch and a bunch of other villains. They do the fight. We're going to skip over a lot of this because it's a lot. Taylor is instrumental in taking out Oni Lee, who's terrifying in my opinion. She barely survives the fight with Lung, but takes him out with some neuter blood, and then carves out his eyes.
Yeah, it's quite a move there. Eye carving.
Yes. Not the first.
No,
it's
but...
actually the third active mutilation at this point, although only the second against Lung. So what do you think of the justification of this?
Yeah, her justification, she uses a lot of, I feel like she does a lot of kind of creating like rationalities in order to like justify some of the violence that she does. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if I buy into it.
Sure. To be fair, he did regenerate his eyes later.
That's okay.
So he does.
That's true. He does.
It's not a permanent injury.
That makes it better.
I mean,
but it's also the same kind of argument that we were making before, with Amy and Victoria of like,
yes,
with like the skinhead, where it's like, even if we know that you can fix it, even if you know that he can fix it, is it still like justified?
Yeah.
You know? And
it's not like there's not any other way of incapacitating him. They did have neuter, you know.
Yeah.
He's bleeding. You just splash blood on Lung, you know. They could have done something, is the point.
Yeah.
But all right, let's continue on. There's a little beat here with bitch sharing her coat with Taylor, and it's really sweet. Yes. But we'll talk more about their relationship later on.
We shall.
Oh yeah, you have a note here about how Taylor's powers are kind of increased here.
Oh yeah. I was thinking in terms of like second stressors, because I don't know. I feel like later on, as like there's more action, she doesn't notice, I guess, as much as earlier, like the kind of like progression of her powers, where she's kind of there's more moments where she's like surprised at how it's progressing. But I was thinking, I don't remember which moment it was that was talking about like second triggers.
Yeah, that's during Gregor's interlude.
Yes. That I was wondering perhaps that like school meeting was kind of that moment. But then I wasn't sure. That was just me, you know, speculating.
Sure, yeah. Before we move on, I want to point out that this is one of the few, during this fight, is one of the few examples of a non-parahuman showing like skill and stuff. Coyle Sniper is basically the one that defeats Oni Lee, but only with Taylor's help, obviously. And he's kind of become a meme in the community.
Why has he become a meme?
Yeah. Just because like everyone kind of holds him up as like the most badass, you know, non-parahuman ever, and like if anyone needs like a plot twist, you know, they'll sometimes pull out Coyle Sniper or something like that. Yeah. It's just fun. So right, we end this arc with Gregor's interlude.
Yes.
So Gregor is this really, really interesting case 53. We see him interact with a courier, basically, and then we see him interact with the rest of Faultline's crew. We mostly get some world building, Manton limits, world building about Manton limits and case 53s and second triggers and other things. And Gregor has these complex thoughts on attraction and disability. And near the end, he pretends to kill Faultline out of friendship.
I really like Gregor. This interlude was so fascinating because he's like very philosophical, and like his inner voice, I suppose, is very philosophical about everything, and like kind of aware of his like his very visible like parahuman physicality, and his kind of unwillingness to put up with other people, I suppose, and kind of the like attention that would garner. Also, side note, the fact that he like doesn't like, and I know that some of them have like this amnesia thing, but just the concept of like not knowing your own accent, or like waking up in a body that you have like that's not in like,
you don't know how you got it.
Yeah, like, or that I don't know, just the like having to like readjust to your physicality, I feel like would be really disorienting, especially if you don't know who you were before. Yeah.
Yeah. It just feels wrong.
Yeah.
One thing I want to point out is, you know, because of their amnesia, you know, they don't remember how they got their powers, right? They don't remember any sort of trigger event.
Oh,
but that certainly doesn't mean that they don't have trauma, right? They, the just the fact that they are in this, inhuman body, is a trauma. So like even those who suffer, from another consequence of amnesia, they still can't get away from pain along with powers.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk anything about world building? This is where we learn about Manton limits, which is how powers only affect certain things and things like that.
I feel like I got slightly confused at this moment.
Sure.
Because
basically, the Manton limit is biological powers will only affect biological things, and powers affecting objects will only affect objects, right? So a fault line, she has the power, I think, to like create like cuts along non-biological objects, but if she can like cut wood in half because the wood's been dead, but she can't cut a tree in half because it's alive.
Was there something else?
Various theories of
about
how that works.
About like the proximity of like to somebody's body. Like I feel like that was in one of the fights where they attribute it to the Manton effect of like if something was close enough to their body, like they couldn't affect it or something like that. Yeah,
I think there might be multiple moments where that happens. I know Vista's power doesn't work when around people. It works around around places.
Okay.
So yeah, it could have been various moments. Yeah.
Okay, that makes. But
more
sense.
I think it's a great addition to just the take on superheroes. It's something that explains something that's been missing from the genre, right?
Yeah, it places boundaries in ways that like we want and like need. You know what I mean?
Yes.
I don't know, like because I feel like there's so many stories where they don't fully explain the limits, or they're just like, it's fine, we don't have to. But I feel like Wildbow does a really good job of kind of looking at those boundaries and kind of explaining them.
So then we have Arc 6, Tangle, in which Taylor commits to being a villain, or lies. So it starts off with Taylor building furniture with Brian. There's some romantic tension, and we meet Brian's sister, Aisha.
Even before like they meet up, there is that like tension, I guess. But I feel like it's exacerbated by Lisa. Because like, I mean, I know Taylor's kind of like aware of it, but I feel like the kind of like implications, I feel like Lisa's kind of like, this could mean something more. I feel like Taylor would have just kind of like continued on just kind of noticing, but not really doing anything if Lisa hadn't been like, do these things.
Yeah. To skip ahead a little, it's interesting to me that Lisa's power is like definitely telling her that Brian likes Taylor, right? But even though that is true, it's not true enough for Brian to like accept her advances later on. Yeah. Although I think there's some extenuating circumstances. But
yeah, well, I feel like also like the concept of like being like liking someone versus like having the external pressures, kind of make space for that is very different. You know what I mean? Plus, I mean, we need pining. That's just kind of a prerequisite, I feel like.
Yeah, that's true. And then we also meet Aisha.
Yeah, and I feel like this is one of those moments where we see the kind of like external pressures for each of the Undersiders, like that it's more kind of what we were talking about before of like we see all these like reasons why people would choose villainy. Because they have these other reasons, like these practical money making, like self-supporting, family supporting reasons of like with that kid the courier that Gregor was paying to like run his errands and stuff, is that he wanted to fund college and that sort of thing, and he's kind of like, I'm willing to do whatever in order to like make this money because I need it for this other thing. But I don't know, it was just it was an interesting kind of reminder of like motivations.
Yes. Yeah. Almost no villains are just evil.
Yeah.
I mean, there's Nazis.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
But like a lot of them have like other reasons.
Yes. So the next major event is the Undersiders crash the fancy hero party. which is a really cool fight scene. There's some cool stuff happening here. Other notable things is that Emma is at this. Of course she is.
Of course.
And this is kind of the final straw for Armsmaster, who now fully disapproves of Skitter.
Yeah. I mean, I also feel like he was just kind of placating her earlier, but I don't know. But anyway, so there was also like an interesting moment in the like the fight, where they use the public setting to kind of dictate Armsmaster's actions, and which is an interesting like shift, I suppose, in the like dynamic of the Undersiders, because instead of immediately turning to Brian in this moment, they look to Lisa because she has the information. Like she has that kind of wellspring, I suppose you could say. And then we kind of see the cracks in the Undersiders, bonds when Gru is kind of. I mean, I get that he's like performing for Armsmaster and all of this, but he also like is really kind of like, yeah, sure, whatever, it's fine, you can kill Regent.
When Regent is threatened.
When Regent is threatened.
He has a machete to his throat.
Yeah, like it's kind of, it's not one of those of like, oh, you have a few moments to like figure it out. It's like, this could happen right now and you're just saying it's fine. I don't know.
Yeah. I think he was probably just betting that Miss Militia wouldn't do that. Yeah, but still.
It was just such a, like, I guess I was kind of taken aback because I kind of, got into the rhythm of like, oh yeah, like these are the people that I'm like supporting. But I'm kind of like, oh.
Yeah. So there's multiple beats here, as you say, of the heroes using the view of the public as this shield. And it's like, especially if you were on the hero side, this would be so frustrating.
Yes.
With Tattletale, they control information, and with Gru, they control the battlefield. This isn't the first time in this arc it happens, and we'll see it again at the end of Arc 8. So, I'm not sure if there's a third beat within this book, but yeah.
I don't remember. I don't think so. But
so you have a next.
Oh yeah, sorry.
You're okay.
There's also kind of noticing that Emma is there, and I feel like a lot of like whenever someone that Taylor recognizes in these moments, she kind of like has those like the vindictive thoughts that she has before they're like her kind of fences that she's like placed in order to like stop acting upon them. I mean they're pretty well like dissolved right now. So kind of like her like psychological terror, her justification that she uses at the bank robbery kind of comes to fruition, I guess, with the gala guests.
Yeah. There's 2 points in this fight where she accidentally lets bugs hurt people more than she would if she was controlling them. So she accidentally sends more of the stinging types in Emma's direction, which I think we can see as a kind of third beat of Taylor of Taylor using violence against Emma. First, she's refusing violence on them at the beginning. Then Taylor uses non-powered violence and punches Emma. And now Taylor is using unconsciously using powered violence against her.
Yeah.
And the second moment of her accidentally is she leaves all her bugs when she leaves, and they continue stinging even more than they would when she was there. So then we meet Coyle, the mysterious benefactor of the Undersiders. He shows how he can control fate and asks Skitter what she wants.
Yeah, this is quite the meeting here, because she still has like this hope of like breaking the status quo, in terms of like, because what we were talking about before, where she sees on her runs, and like she sees as she's going through the city, like she knows the kind of like the like cracks, I guess, in the foundations of this system. And I think she has this kind of idyllic hope, I guess, to kind of like have that kind of reform, and kind of like to save the city. But then Coyle really doesn't have that. He has his own kind of plan. Which I was thinking of him in this kind of like Mephistopheles kind of way, like where he's like speaking to her as if she's like Faustus? Yeah, Faustus. In terms of like making a deal with the devil. But it's like there's always going to be like a price, and like a compromise. But
Yeah.
I feel like I had another thought.
We'll talk more about Coyle during his interlude at the end here.
Yes.
So
We'll
have more there. Yeah. So then Taylor goes home and is trapped by her dad. So Taylor goes home and she starts drafting a letter to Miss Militia saying everything, to turn Coyle in, and by extension the Undersiders. And then she's trapped by her dad. So she struggles to decide what to do until she kind of decides she can't do it. She can't turn in the Undersiders. Mm-hmm. And kind of the only thing she can do, because she can't admit what's going on to her dad, is leave. So with the help of Lisa, she leaves home.
Yeah, this is it's interesting too that she kind of turns to the next person that she is like kind of dismissed Armsmaster after this whole fight, and now she's kind of like, well, maybe if like I can talk to a different hero, it'll be okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because she still has this kind of like individual reading of each of the heroes at this point, but we see that kind of breakdown beginning to happen, I guess, of like her, kind of disillusionment with like hero authority, I suppose. Mm-hmm.
I think this is another major moment that we could talk about for 15 minutes, but for the sake of time, we're going to save most of this for next episode when we talk more about Danny. I do wonder though, like clearly, trapping Taylor was not the right way to do it, but like I wonder, is there any course of action he could have done that would have ended with her actually turning in all her friends? Like I don't know. Like I wonder if this conversation is kind of just like it pushes her to acknowledge that no, she can't do it, or I kind of see it as her mind was already kind of made up, but she didn't know it.
Yeah, I think honestly, I feel like she's had her mind made up for like a while.
Yeah.
And I don't really think that anything that Danny would have done could have made her change her mind.
Yeah.
Because it's also she doesn't want to drag him into it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And she's kind of in her like calculating way. She perhaps has like she's been kind of carrying around this safety net, I guess, of like saying that she's going to go and turn them in. Mm-hmm. But I think it's really only that, like just kind of this nominal sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. Let's move on for the sake of time. Yes. So the interlude at the end of Arc 6 is Canary. So she's kind of being persecuted unfairly by the justice system, and she's sent off to the birdcage.
Yeah, Canary is fascinating, especially because she gets the same sort of treatment as like Bakuda, and Lung. But like the reason for her imprisonment is very different than theirs, which that was a whole nother thing of like the intentionality of her, like where's the intentionality when she's saying a threat that like everybody says all the time. I mean, not everybody, but like, it's a fairly common thing, but like just because of her abilities, like it becomes violent and like becomes this very different situation.
Yeah. It's really clear that text goes out of its way to show that this is unfair. Dragon is sympathizing with her. Mm-hmm. So we get to the birdcage and we see that it's self-policed, which doesn't really turn out really well. I mean, by the end of this, Lung kills Bakuda to prove a point.
Yeah, I feel like it's kind of... I get the feeling that it's going to reappear, this kind of self-policing. I don't know. I don't know how yet, but I feel like it will reappear.
Sure, yeah. Yes. Mm-hmm. So then we have Arc 7, Buzz, in which Brockton Bay as a whole wars against Empire 88. Mm-hmm. But we start off with Taylor going with Rachel to visit her dogs. I think this is a good moment to talk about Rachel as a whole. It's because it's kind of like a big bonding moment between them, and Taylor comes in here with Lisa's understanding of Rachel's psychology, and they've had a couple moments before, and Taylor not only just like empathizes with Rachel, but also like stands her ground.
She knows how to kind of make space for her to enter the conversation. Like she doesn't, she like, because she has had all those conversations, like she knows kind of how to like navigate a conversation so that Rachel feels comfortable to contribute. It's also, this is like the moment when she calls her Rachel and not bitch, which is like a whole other thing that just like the familiarity and kind of this like created and like constructed intimacy, I guess, that kind of like creates, it kind of like cultivates that feeling of friendship.
Yeah. And Taylor just keeps trying to throughout these arcs. Taylor reaches out to Rachel, and then Rachel slaps her hand away, and then Taylor reaches out again. So Taylor really works to meet Rachel halfway between their understandings, and I think that's probably something Rachel didn't and doesn't get a lot of. That like people like Brian and others. It kind of seems like they are just trying to pull her over to the normal understanding. And yeah, Taylor is accommodating.
Yeah, she like meets her halfway. That's good. That's a good acknowledgement, I think, of like the difference between particularly Brian and Taylor in their interaction there.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a wonderful friendship here.
Yeah.
So then a problem arises because Coyle has outed Empire 88's secret identities, and by implication, he has put the Undersiders in the line of fire.
Yeah, this so this is the second time that like somebody has kind of like broken the social logics, I guess, of like the kind of the rules of the capes. Where he's like pulling in families, revealing identities, and it's like, I suppose it's a similar dilemma to like the first interlude with like the skinhead and Amy and Victoria, where it's like we know that they're not grand people. We know that they like their ideology is very like violent, but this is also kind of like a shattering of that kind of like balance of hero and villain. That it kind of like, asks for more to like break the rules, I guess. Is that those kind of the boundaries, I guess, of how everything is functioning are kind of like they get renegotiated because of what Coyle does.
Yeah. So Taylor has to go with Taylor and Brian go to his apartment to kind of lay low. But on the way, she sees Sophia, and Taylor decides that this is the moment to kiss Brian. And basically, it's kind of really done in a selfish way. She's doing it for herself and to get at Sophia. Sophia like follows them into a bookshop and like really performs this horrible violence against Taylor. And Brian comes to help, but afterwards, Taylor confesses why she kissed him, because she likes him, and he kind of rejects her.
It's so painful to watch this whole progression, particularly because like the kiss is like it doesn't hold like one singular motivation behind it, because it's like, I mean, it's also, yes, it's because Taylor likes Brian, but it's like also because it's like in this visible public space, and like it's for the emotional manipulation of Sophia, and then all of this, and then I don't know, it's very heartbreaking to kind of like see that happen. It feels a little gross on a reread. I remember my first time reading this, I was like so happy for Taylor. I was like both, yeah, kiss Brian, romance, wonderful, but I was also like, fuck you, Sophia, Taylor can win too. But like, if you view this from Brian's perspective, even if he likes Taylor, and even if she's doing it partially because she likes him, like
I mean, I would feel kind of used.
Yeah, I don't think I would. I don't think I would like that. Man.
On this read, I was like tense from the kiss on. I was thinking, no.
I was super tense.
Especially, I mean, just for other context, this is not a romantic moment, Taylor.
No, it's not. I think that's why it's
even,
so
even
tense.
Even if Sophia wasn't there, it's a bus. Why?
Oh gosh, yeah. This whole progression was just very like, I was just waiting for the other shoe to drop the whole time.
Yeah, and then Sophia kind of shows that this is not. I mean, there's consequences for this, basically, very physical ones.
Yeah, it was. We see here also that like Sophia, like in this moment, in this like very like violent moment in the bookstore where she's like using violence as like a teaching mechanism almost, in addition to like humiliation. She brings up some troubling rhetoric, I think, about like having a place and like staying in that place and like learning where it is and all this, and just like knowing where, like later on, knowing who she is, it just seems like a really like something to think about, I suppose, like that she's this young ward, I suppose, where but then she's kind of like holding on to these ideas about like where people should be, and like this kind of like, you know, stratifying kind of, you know, social classification almost. I don't know, it seems something to think about, of like where along the way did she kind of like internalize this. Yeah
So after some awkward, you know, tension moments with Brian and Taylor, they have to fight and more survive Empire 88. There's a lot of cool fighting here, and it ends basically with Lisa giving the location of Purity's daughter, who's been taken by the Protectorate.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and there's more that I will go into in my character study of Purity, but like it's also this return to using like the public in a fight, that the kind of what they were doing before with Armsmaster. Which is just, in terms of like a tactic, I suppose, it's an interesting distinction between like Purity and Kaiser, I suppose, and kind of like how they think about themselves. I don't know.
So then the Undersiders meet with Coyle, basically to yell at him for a little bit, although he just says like, yeah, I'll totally stop putting you guys in danger. You have my word. It's like, okay, great. Super believe him. But Coyle reveals his secret, that the Undersiders had helped him kidnap a little girl named Dinah, who has the power to predict the future. And he controls her with drugs. He calls her his pet. And after this, Skitter realizes that she can't be with the rest of the Undersiders because they are basically okay with it. Yeah, they really are willing to kind of look past this in a way that's surprising. I mean, I suppose it shouldn't be surprising, but it is, especially because it's just, I mean, like, it's visible. Like, this kid is like right in front of them and they see this happening. And they're responsible. Yeah, too. Like they hold equal. I mean, I don't know if they hold equal culpability, but they do definitely, like, they hold some amount of blame for like gathering her and this sort of thing, even if they didn't fully know at the time. Yeah, it kind of this really like lays bare all of the kind of moments before that we saw that were kind of like, you saw the cracks in this alliance of these you know, this whole group. I don't know, we see what they're willing to like look past. Yeah, I think this is really a moment where we realize, oh yeah, the Undersiders are villains. They're not good people. You know, I mean, Rachel kind of gets a pass for her, you know, she's just has unfortunate upbringing and psychology, and it's not entirely her fault, but also she's killed people, so I don't know. We can reflect on past stuff of like times where just all the Undersiders were cruel to their enemies, to Uber and Leet, to Victoria and Amy, just like really like kind of trying to crush people emotionally. And other times, Brian using some, pretty serious violence against Rachel at times, right? When they first meet in Arc 2, Brian punches Rachel in the face, right?
Yeah, it's pretty
fair. The dogs were attacking Taylor, but like this is clearly, not the first time. Yeah. And later on, we get Tattletale's interlude, and we see that, she was stealing and also hurting people emotionally in her past as well. I also think Brian's argument is a great example of the slippery slope kind of thing that I don't think that's really exactly the right term, but I can't remember what Taylor describes it as. But the same thing that she was talking about in Arc 6 with her in her letter, looking back and realizing that you've done worse than you believe. But Brian says that we already ignore all the other bad things in the world. Why not ignore this too? But the thing is we shouldn't be ignoring all the other bad things in the world because it's just that we feel, powerless to stop it all. But it's not good to not care about other people in the world either.
Yeah, it was kind of, I guess the like not thinking about the the other bad things in the world is more of like lack of agency. Where in this moment they have more, they have more power to like do something about it than other people do, which I think is what's so like jarring about it, is that it's not just like, oh, this is something that we see, but like we can't do anything about it. It's just, it's within their grasp to do something, and then they still choose to not do anything.
Yeah. In other stuff, it's like, thinking the thought there's always going to be, starving kids in third world countries, right? Is different from there's always going to be little girls getting drugged by supervillains. Like, it's not the same thing.
Yeah, that we're working for. Like, it's so much closer, and like, I don't know. Not to say that the other is like worse, but I don't know. Anyways, continue. Sorry.
So this arc ends. Taylor flees, and the arc ends with the Endbringer alarm sounding. But first we get our interlude between 7 and 8. So we have Miss Militia's interlude. We start off with her in, I think she's Kurdish, and she's having to step through a forest with potential traps, and she thinks she might die. And then she sees something vast.
Yes. This is really ominous to me. This just like this really large something that's kind of like undefined and I don't know, kind of, all encompassing. But I don't know, it kind of like brought up this whole concept that like, we'll see later with Leviathan of like what are these beings? Like how far does a parahuman have to like transform to like lose that connection to humanity, and like, I don't know. I don't know if whatever this vast thing is, a parahuman or something else. But it's just, I don't know. There's just some things that seem more unknowable, than kind of like the very beginning quote of like with Scion, and how like this kind of like golden age stopped and like people realized that parahumans are just humans. They have like the same sort of flaws, but like there's these things, these kind of like undefined large beings, I guess.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And Miss Militia, she talks about as a side effect, and we're not sure why, she doesn't sleep, and she thinks that that's why she can remember this thing when no one else has any memory of something like that. Yeah.
Oh, it's so I want to know more.
Yes. I think this interlude is really interesting, and there's some other characterization and stuff. But we'll move on to Arc 8. So we start off with Arc 8, Extinction, this final arc of this book, in which Leviathan destroys the city. It's kind of huge. It's intense. As I've said, this is kind of like the point where, like, if you don't like Worm, if you don't like Arc 8, you're not going to like Worm.
Yeah.
So we start off with a lot of pre-battle stuff. There's basically storms incoming. Everyone is going towards their shelters. And Taylor and the other, basically all the parahumans of the city travel to a meeting location with the heroes, where Legend gives a speech to the gathering heroes and villains. But of note here is that Taylor is completely alone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she's kind of like returned to this like solitude of before. But I feel like it's even worse because like she knows what it feels like to like be in a group again. She's kind of like reawoken that like friendship feeling. Anyways, also, just as like a beginning of this arc, like the way that the city, or not the way, no, the way that the battle was set up, and kind of this like in this much more like detailed way, is something I haven't really ever seen in any other superhero story. Where it's like there's so much detail to it. Like we know like not even just like the description of it, but like the fact that the city's like prepared, like they've set up emergency measures and they've practiced, and like they have all these like, you know, stipulations, and they Wildbow like takes the time to like explain about like who has different powers of like the like communication devices and all of this. Like there's so much more consideration of like how this is going to affect the city as a whole, which it's really like thought out and meticulous, and we kind of like see that, and then immediately like it's chaos as it begins. Yeah, even with all this preparation. We mentioned this, we talked about this before off air, how, you know, another superhero story is that, I mean, the city gets attacked all the time, but almost always it's the heroes responding in a haphazard manner, right? And it's like, you know, in the Avengers, it's the 6 of them or whatever, and yeah, they're all
you know,
like making plans like in the middle of it. You know, they're kind of like not really paying attention to like the collateral damage. Whereas like with this, it's like it's a disaster plan, like that's been made by the city. Yeah.
As another like just genre world building thing, I think it's super significant that there's just so many parahumans. Like there's so many that are just described and not named, and they like actually end up being significant. I'm skipping ahead here, but there's the moment where she has to, you know, abandon that parahuman who's floating in the water, and run towards the shield, right? I forget exactly who it is. I think it's Shielder, but I'm not entirely sure. But so like Shielder, right? Like a parahuman, you know, saving a bunch of people under a force field, like that would. Basically an almost unnamed side character, right? The story is not going to be about this. I'm fairly certain that he like dies in this, or another parahuman who does the same thing dies in this. And in something like the X-Men, right? There might be some generic, you know, powered individuals, but they would never have like a significant moment like this, right? Where he's, you know, being a hero here. As another moment, right, there's that bit with the hero Bastion collapses a building on himself, right? And, like he's introduced and you know, killed in a chapter. It's it's stuff that I would have never seen in another superhero story.
And I feel like also like the medium of having it as like this kind of written narrative, I think makes space for that in ways that like film and like comics don't, particularly because like you can have like an aside of like a description of someone, and then like you don't have to like there's space for those kind of descriptions of different people, of like of those characters that we will only see for like a moment.
So I think this opening is really, really strong. We were talking about you were talking about the preparations and stuff, and I think we can immediately see just how terrified everyone is. The civilians, the, you know, unpowered authorities, the heroes and villains. the rules just around everything kind of dissolve with the rain and the water. Like we see a first hint of that when a police officer helps skid her out, right? Like the first one notices her, says, as if acknowledging, yes, they know that she's a villain, and then the other one says no and like directs her to somewhere. It's such a we never would have seen that before in the previous arcs. And when she gets there, a metal hero claps a hand on her shoulder and smiles at her because they're working together. So there's like no heroes and villains here, just parahumans and oncoming water. So we have we had a question talking about legend speech. So we'll talk about that later, but I think it's really well done. So we have all this preparation, and then Leviathan appears, and he's devastating.
He there's a really interesting like the way that Wildbow like writes the fight scene has a really interesting, or has a very like specific rhythm to it, where like it kind of creates the same frenetic pace as like the actual action, where we kind of move from the parahumans who were like fighting the Leviathan to Taylor's like immediate situation where she's like trying to help people, and then also like she's making all these observations about her own state of mind, and kind of like that kind of movement between all three of them is like a really interesting dynamic, I guess, that gets set up in like a fight scene, because like there's so much of like the observations that we wouldn't, that are really, they kind of add a lot to the battle, and like we don't get lost in the chaos because there is that kind of like jumping back and forth, but it's also like in her little like small moments of like trying to help, we see like how unmatched the two different sides are.
Yeah. Yeah, I think like where the previous fights have been fights or maybe battles, this is a war zone. Like I mean, it really feels more like a storming of D-Day kind of thing than any kind of there's just so much confusion here and helplessness.
There was I don't think it happens in this particular moment. It's like later on that Taylor has this like observation of this like particular street that she would run, and like the shopping center, and like all these all these like particular locations that have completely changed with this like kind of watery battlefield. There we go. Is it like the urban landscape that everyone knows has like completely changed because of the presence of Leviathan.
Yeah. Just for a moment, I want to talk about how cinematic Leviathan's appearance is. So we have the speech, and then he's here. He's at the end of this like long corridor of buildings in my mind, and we get like a top to bottom description of him. Just a single pause, and then he's amongst the heroes. He's devastating from the beginning, and with the armbands announcing the deaths, we immediately all of our preconceptions of how this kind of fight was going to go are just gone. Like, I mean, I kind of came in assuming like a maybe Pacific Rim kind of kaiju fight, right? Or the Avengers, right? Where it's like, yes, there will be some losses, but they will be done in dramatic moments, and they will be for worthy deaths, right? But no, it's like immediately there are losses. The sheer strength of the environment alone is killing multiple capes. It's shocking the first time you read it.
It absolutely was.
Yeah. So as we said before, there's a moment here where Taylor has to abandon saving this drowning cape. I feel like in her dilemma here, there's like, we can see the direness of the situation, because like she's trying to help, but like even in her kind of like this limiting thought of like the contents of her belt, we see how little
control she had, like, is present, I suppose. And then it's also, like, it's a very different situation of, like, having to abandon someone to a death in, like, this emergency sort of situation, rather than, like, her kind of in the fights where she's kind of, like, thinking, you know, them or me in this more, like, active sort of way. In terms of, like, if we're thinking about, like, the, you know, the morality of it, I guess, this is less about a decision and more about, like, the limitations of her like, abilities.
Right, because when the wave crashes, they're both gonna die if they're not in a shield. Yeah. So here she tries and fails to save a hero, and it's a tragic moment, but it's also just, like, really shows you how much Taylor is out of her depth here. I think at this point I was probably wondering, why is she here, right? Her bugs can't hurt an Endbringer. I'm sure she's aware of that going in, right? Just general knowledge, I'm sure, would tell you that. So in this, she's basically just a human who knows first aid and is wearing a dense costume. Yeah.
But it's like...
more or less, anyway.
She's still, like... She has this hold on, like, the directionality and, like, the kind of, like, relative location of, like, other people.
Right.
And also, like, later on, she's kind of, like, tracking him. And it's just, like, it's an interesting sort of, like, extension, I guess, of that, that kind of, like, environmental sensing that she has. Where, like, you wouldn't think that her bugs would be able to contribute so much, like, knowledge, I guess. But she uses them in that way so often. Yeah.
So the next moment is we have Tattletale's Interlude, which actually was a bonus interlude. It was Wildbow wrote it because they reached a certain patron goal.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, so that's rather interesting.
That is.
So what's that?
Oh, that's interesting in terms of, like, the, like, placement of it.
Yes. Which is weird because it works really, really well here.
It does.
Yeah. So we see her life, right? Most of her, you know, her story in Brockton Bay, and then her apparent death.
Yes. Her, just as, like, a note about her, like, the way that her powers are written, the way that her, like, brain supplies information is very meandering. It's not calculating like Taylor, where, like, she kind of, like, makes lists and, like, is able to, like, kind of parse out what she needs to know. Whereas, like, Lisa's is more of, like, kind of meandering, you know, this kind of stream of consciousness sort of thing. But yeah, so it's kind of interesting that she is one with this kind of, like, you know, power of like gathering information when she's not really like, she doesn't really, like, sort it, I guess, as much.
That's true.
Yeah. And also just I really liked that we got to see Taylor in this moment. Like, we see her with, like, the paper on her shoulder and, like, the bugs kind of, like, feeling out the environment. And we see Lisa's understanding of Taylor and kind of this, like, balance between, like, friendship and solitude and, like, loneliness and all of this, which I think was a really important look, especially in this moment. Just because, like, we haven't seen that before.
Yeah.
From the outside.
Yeah. Something I found interesting about Lisa's power, right, is that this is essentially Wildbow's take on Sherlock. If you've seen the BBC Sherlock show, it's basically represented in this way with, like, you know, thoughts coming up and putting them together. So, I mean, that's what Tattletale's power is, right? It's super intuition. But she's completely and utterly different from Sherlock. Like, they are not like, there's so many, you know, Sherlock shows, right? There's House, right? There's Elementary. Yeah. If you put all those in the same room, they would act in similar ways because they are the same character, right? But if you put Tattletale in the same room as Sherlock, like, they would be completely different people, which is, I don't know. I just find that very interesting.
Yeah, it's really, like, all about, like,
have the same kind of neuroses sometimes.
Yeah, that is true.
Yeah. So she basically almost dies at the end of here. But it's not clear if she does or she doesn't. In fact, the armbands do announce that she's dead, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, I
So
for a while, like before we got to like the conversation between Armsmaster and Taylor, in the midst of like the fighting, I definitely thought that she was dead, and I was like, what?
yeah, yeah.
But then that conversation was like a little bit like
read, for sure.
hinky, I guess, or like a little bit odd, where he was like, I don't know, just that left me like suspicious. So I was like, maybe not, maybe it's okay.
So then, speaking of that, Armsmaster decides to fight Leviathan 1-on-1 and loses.
Yeah, Armsmaster is like almost frighteningly arrogant. And we see this before, but like particularly in this moment that he's like so sure, like, oh my gosh, in all of his fight scenes, he's so sure that he has all the information, but then it's like he tells everyone about it, and like it's almost like this supervillain verbosity where he's like chatting away during a fight, and it's like, oh haha, I like know all this stuff, and it's like,
yeah,
that doesn't work out. Like I don't understand why he's so frustrating.
Yeah, it's he has the classic problem of just straight up hubris, right? He's arrogant enough to think he can take on anything. So what do you think of I think the implication during this fight is, right, Armsmaster is winning until Leviathan suddenly and unexpectedly just moves a bit faster. Just something I find interesting is that it doesn't seem like that much of a difference. Like he's just moving a little bit faster, and it just Armsmaster's prediction equipment probably just like couldn't
handle that,
keep up. It's just like suddenly the model was wrong, is how I understood it, and the way that Leviathan is taking down Armsmaster is just so. I mean, it's not mundane because it's a giant monster, but in comparison to like other media and how a twist like that would happen other times, it does feel very mundane. He's just suddenly caught. But I think the implication in the text, I believe, is that Leviathan was like always feigning any injury. But what do you think happened here?
Well, I mean, but like the physicality of it, like we see him we see like all of his like wounds and stuff, don't we? Like all the injuries. And
yes.
I don't know, I couldn't quite parse out if Leviathan was always feigning all of them, because I wasn't sure if it was like he had been feigning the whole time, or like there was a moment where he like had like a renewal sort of thing of like where he like pulls the water out of the storm sewers or something like that like I don't know, I wasn't quite sure about how it
so at this point the battle kind of completely devolves as Leviathan runs free. Taylor has to track him with the help of a parahuman with flight, and then Taylor eventually tracks him to a shelter.
Yeah, it's this we see Taylor kind of grapple with her like deeply vindictive desire again, where she I think the exact phrase is like a fitting justice, where she's like ready to leave Mr. Gladly there. And kind of like but then at the last moment she's like, no, I should do the heroic thing. But it's interesting because like it sits like right beneath her skin, like a lot closer than it had before. And we see it like getting closer and closer every time that she kind of like indulges that, not indulges, but like, kind of acts it out, I suppose, in like a more physical way.
Yeah. You had some notes here about just the battle in general.
I wanted to mention just like there's all these like very specific things that like I really liked a lot, just in terms of like the writing of it, because it really like we felt that like the reality of this situation, where like Taylor's thinking about, she's like talking with, I feel like she's talking to Lady Photon and like a couple of other people, where she's like, let's go get this motherfucker. And oh wait, no, maybe I shouldn't say that sort of thing, where she's like thinking about the kind of like social niceties, I guess. And then like Lady Photon's kind of like the mundanity of morning breath, where it's like she didn't have time to brush her teeth that morning. And like we wouldn't see that, and it's so cool that we can kind of just sit there in that moment and like, I don't know, there's a lot more like materiality to the story that we see in this battle.
Yeah, I mean, Taylor like vomits during this, and it's not even because of like an effect or anything. It's just horrible.
And there's like, I feel like there's another moment, like not in this battle, but like earlier on, where she's like, I can't vomit because I can't pull my mask up, you know. And so like in this moment, she's like, oh, I have to pull it up. Where it's like, I mean, you wouldn't think about that, but it's like, yeah, I mean, you would have to take the mask off. Yeah.
Regarding motherfucker, right? I think she goes like, let's go get that. And then she has that, you know, back and forth. And then she says, let's go get him.
This kind of.
And she has this phrase of like, she considers a lot of the things she says as lame. So she says, I said lamely. And this is not the first case this happens. And it's just, I don't know, it's just fascinating that a supervillain is like concerned about appearing lame. Yeah. Especially when like people are dying all around.
I know, it's these funny little things.
Yes. I mean, it makes sense. Yeah.
Because she's also like, she's very hyper aware of like how she sits within any sort of like social interaction. Like she's very aware of like her physicality and like the way that she's contributing and all of this. So we do see that sort of like continuity.
Yeah. So right, she sees Mr. Gladly in the shelter. It seems she almost like wants to leave him to die. She's like so mad that he gets to have a girlfriend and stuff. It's her anger in this is just seems so out of place. But we see her, she leaves, Leviathan goes into the shelter and he's like killing tons of people. And Taylor goes outside, grabs the halberd, Armsmaster's halberd, and uses it to do one heroic attack to save the civilians. I don't know if we have anything else to say here.
I mean, it's I feel like the moment after she does this like heroic attack, where she's kind of like left in the aftermath of it, where she's like seemingly accepting that she's perhaps going to die, is that, I don't know, she like kind of is thinking about, you know, is this karma? Like not about like, okay, like this is how it ends, I suppose. It's kind of like, well, what if I hadn't let that one guy die?
Yeah. So in the process of the heroic attack, she has her back broken, and it really does seem that Taylor is going to die. And she's like in the water. Really in this cold calculation kind of thing. She's thinking about her own impending death, right? She like thinks through what the process is going to be.
It's so, and it's so odd.
And there's nothing. Yeah. She's like, first I'll suck in a breath, and and she's like so completely powerless. There's nothing at all that she can do. Although I don't think she thinks about her bugs much, but not that they could do much. There's something else I wanted to say here. And just that like this death is so kind of not dramatic, I guess. Yeah,
it's very like
that's not the term, but it's certainly not. It's not a romantic death.
It's not like charged with any sort of emotion.
Yeah, she's face down in dirty, muddy water. She can't. There's no poetry about how the water is beautiful or anything like that. It's just dark mud, and she's just floating in it. She's not like currently even drowning. She's not been stabbed, bleeding out. She's like, this is a slow thing, and she's just holding her breath, right? So it's I don't know. There's a lot to read in there, I think. Until Rachel saves her. She happens to be by and pulls Taylor out of the water, and we watch with Rachel as her dogs sacrifice themselves to fight Leviathan.
It's very emotionally charged, this moment, like, and I feel like it's even more so like because there is this sort of like cold acceptance of like, oh, well, I'm gonna die, and then suddenly it's like your friend, and she's like willing to like lose, to like sacrifice her friends, I suppose, that like have made her into who she is, you know. And I don't know, it was just this very like wonderful moment between Rachel and Taylor, specifically like because it's so like demonstrative
Yeah.
Which I feel like it's kind of harkening back to the beginning with Lung and Taylor being saved by friends. But I mean, in like a more material way, I suppose. But like,
yeah, I think that's an interesting connection. I haven't seen that before, but that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. I'm gonna also say that every time I've read this, Taylor being saved by Rachel, and after we know that Rachel's really upset by the betrayal, and Rachel's like sheer emotion as her dogs sacrifice themselves one by one, it's never failed to bring me to tears before. So, and then kind of as almost to make the deaths of these dogs meaningless, right? That the very last second, Scion appears and ends the fight.
Yeah, it's really an interesting end, because that like there's so much like destruction and chaos and like disturbance of like this environment by Leviathan. It's like it's just this huge like mess that has been created, and then Scion appears and is just like very silent and like very like still, and just kind of I don't know, like just the whole concept of like why Leviathan is here is something that I am still wondering about. But it just seemed like in this particular moment that it was like Leviathan was making a ruckus, like to be noticed. I don't know. It's just
like to be noticed by
Scion. But I don't know. I don't understand why Leviathan is here in the first place, I guess. Like the motivation behind it. Because like, I mean, besides just like destruction or like just sheer chaos of like this kind of set in like the, Egyptian god kind of way of like chaos for chaos's sake, I guess.
Sure.
But like, I don't know. I don't see motivation for Leviathan.
Yeah. Well, we'll find out.
Yay, good.
I guess.
I hope.
Well, that wasn't a promise. That was just a...
No,
I can't
alas.
say anything more. We'll find out if we find out their motivations. That's what I meant to say. I think this is really interesting that this is both a climax and an anticlimax of the fight, right? The dogs are probably far more of an emotional climax than Scion's appearance is. And I mean, like, just how Scion's powers work is just like stilling everything. Yeah. Really, like, it's and then the battle is just kind of over. It almost immediately we're just chasing Leviathan away. What do you think of the and then it's clear that the Capes did not win this on its own, on their own, and would not have won if Scion had not intervened. What do you think of the expression Scion gives Eidolon, the one that Taylor describes as, I think, deep disgust?
So I originally wrote out that it was like Scion seemed like this god disappointed in the ways creation turned out. And I think this is what, like, he just seems so distant from the rest of them, where it's like he's on this like totally other track, I guess, where it's like, oh, maybe I suppose another interpretation that I was thinking of was like he was expecting something better from the heroes or from the parahumans, but then like isn't surprised by like their hope of, perhaps collaborating with him or like perhaps beating Leviathan or something. He just seemed, I mean, I also like if you spend 30 years like helping people and like, fighting the cruelty of the world, I feel like the arrogance, I guess, of individuals who aren't capable. I don't know. I can't tell if he's like just like disillusioned, I guess.
Sure. Yeah. All right. So the fight is over and Taylor is brought to a hospital. She is really, really confused. No one's telling her why she's there. They've handcuffed her to her bed. And then Panacea comes around and sort of plays mind games on her.
Yeah. They're both sort of like sparring psychologically. Like, there was an interesting thought of Taylor's where she's like, I'll let her help, but like, just so if she fucks it up, like I'll have someone specific to hate. Instead of being like, oh, I'll go through this whole thing of like trying to, just kind of have this like slower, drawn out, loss of hope of like, because at this point her back is still broken. But yeah, so it's just this kind of, they didn't seem that different in mindset, I guess.
Yeah, and it's interesting how they kind of are both fighting with their views of the world as well. Taylor's talking about how she views herself as a good person, and Panacea is like, that's fucking stupid. I don't know. I think there's a lot to bring out here. I also want to point out that Panacea is like pretty cruel. She says that, Tattletale and Taylor kind of did the same thing to her before. She's definitely not stopping this, cycle of cruelty.
They keep extending it where they're like, oh, well, this happened before, so it's justified that we do this.
Yeah. I think also there's just, a little bit of irony in this whole thing that if they had just communicated a tiny bit to Taylor, at least tell her, hey, we are not arresting you in the aftermath of an Endbringer attack, then like everything would have turned out differently, and it could have turned out the hero's way. But because of that policy of not giving information and Panacea making things worse, it didn't. Especially because it leads to Taylor escaping, using her powers to escape, and accidentally seeing Sophia unmasked as Shadowstalker. This is such a
scene, like we see how many like things that were unexplained before are like suddenly immediately explained by these like social or like political motivations, especially in like setting the terms of like who is a villain and who is a hero. It reveals how there's so much more than just like individual morality and individual definitions of like what right and wrong is, of like in determining who is a hero and who is a villain.
I think this is a hugely emotional moment. It's been a very long time since I read the story the first time, but I think I could still imagine that shock of just Taylor's horrible bully is a hero. And she flashes back and she connects it to why Emma might have stopped being her friend. So we hit that betrayal beat again. And I think it's also really interesting how like this is a huge, there's tons of emotions here from Taylor, even far exceeding that when she was confronted with her own death, right? But like this, like, the conflict of bullying, as horrible as it is kind of like petty in the aftermath of a fight where, dozens of parahumans died and probably hundreds of normal humans, and the city was destroyed. But it feels even more emotionally powerful than when Scion appeared. So I think this chapter, it's interesting. When you look at the arc, right? The fight with Scion, the fight with Leviathan actually ends pretty early in the arc. There's like a whole 3 or 4 chapters left, and it's because like this chapter is the real, like the true climax of the arc.
Because it kind of like, this is we see that sort of like with Scion, it's just kind of it's much broader, and she's like in that moment, like she's in that kind of like large fight, but it's not as like emotionally devastating as this kind of like explanation of like why all of these things have happened before, and like kind of this is kind of like the fleshing out of like her origin story, I suppose. Yeah.
So Taylor is then confronted by the heroes, and they try to threaten her into joining them. Basically, she has Shadowstalker's, mask, and so they're now entitled to, punish her, send her to the birdcage or something. Then the Undersiders show up, and they kind of help her out a little bit. Tattletale reveals to the heroes, not everyone, not the public, just the heroes, that Armsmaster was sacrificing villains' lives for his own glory. And then Armsmaster then outs Taylor as a fake villain to the Undersiders. And then at the end of this, Taylor flees.
Yeah. It's so much to happen in like such a short amount of time.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, and particularly I think in the moment that what I noticed the most, I think, is kind of the first glimpse that we see of the Undersiders is like they're still not kind of, you know, forgiven or whatever. They're not like, you know, rejoined, but Taylor like already knows the kind of like construction of what they're doing. Like she's like learned how to read them. That I don't know. It's there's I don't know. She's like she's kind of left. She has no more like connections where it's like there's no connection to the heroes anymore, like that kind of nominal thought of like betraying the Undersiders, and now she's not connected to the Undersiders, and like she's not going to return to her dad, so she's just kind of even more alone than when she began.
Yeah. I you know, this being the climax of this book, that like this scene has between the Sophia reveal and the Armsmaster reveal and the Taylor reveal, there's 3 betrayals here. So it's like the heroes and society and authority, they betrayed Taylor by having Sophia be a hero. Armsmaster betrayed the truce and like society as a whole by sacrificing villains to get a better shot at Leviathan. And Taylor betrayed the Undersiders by having planned to turn them in. And it's just this like broiling pot of emotions. And you just get like, you have a sinking feeling like start to end. Even if it like might spike when like, you know, we have some righteous indignation in our narration. But you know, we finish on Taylor's betrayal, right?
Yeah.
So this is not a victory.
No.
So the arc ends with a chapter about the Endbringer Memorial.
Yes, this one, it's so fascinating to me, like this whole memorial in and of itself. Just like this kind of established place of like public grieving of people known and unknown, and like the names being either just like the names of like their like cape name or like their, you know, regular casual name, I don't know, but like the duality of the names, and then like and then it's so immediate, like it's like 5 days later that like all these people are like, oh yeah, like it's become a place of not only public grieving but also like gathering, where it's like there's picnickers and like all this. It was just like a really interesting, or not interesting, it was really fast of a turnaround of a redefinition of public space. And then the addition of like that Rachel makes of like carving in you know, kind of her like revision of this like public memory to include her own narrative with her dog sacrifice. It was just like a really lovely moment. Yeah.
It's between just seeing them and, you know, Taylor remarking that it probably took a long time to do that. They really cared. We can just picture that entire scene, you know, Rachel showing up at night and doing that. I do wonder if there is a similar memorial for the civilians who died.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, there's certainly a different, you know, purpose for this, right? This is for those who were fighting, you know, to save people, right? Maybe they might deserve a memorial, you know, more than others who died more passively. But, yeah, I'm just wondering what that is, especially because, like, you know, people are grieving at this memorial, but the people who are named, they're only parahumans, and there's only so many families of those parahumans, especially only so many that like don't want to be outed. So yeah, but it's a beautiful chapter and a really good end to the first 8 arcs as a whole. So the final chapter we're covering is Coyle's Interlude. We see that he can split timelines, and
yes, Coyle.
Yes,
he likes power.
Yes,
which, I mean, we see that obviously with like Brian and like how he's kind of created this like cyclical relationship, like this you know, I guess like singular relationship of supplier and subject, I guess, I don't know, where with like Dina Alcott. But it's a kind of like gambling kind of power, like the power over the desperate, because it's much more like volatile, especially ones who like the ones who think that they have control, I guess. Or no, with Coyle, yes. He thinks that he has control in a way that I don't think that he does.
Yeah. When we have that, scene in the limo in arc 6, we really see, how arrogant he is too. He thinks that he's the one who's going to take over the city. It's interesting how he's acknowledging that yes, this is a supervillain trope. I'm not like the supervillain trope of taking over the world. I'm not that crazy. I'm only taking over a city. And
it was the quote that he used before. I pulled out. I think the one where it was like he can't stop crime or something, but it's like he's willing.
They are like beasts he can tame.
Like beasts he can tame, which was such a boastful, I guess, kind of almost like naivety to me, that he thinks that he can wield that sort of control.
Yeah. I think, and I think the reason for his arrogance and his self-importance is, his power is pretty much, I create two universes where the only thing that matters is my choice, because I can delete the other choice. He's seeing two worlds where basically only his actions matter.
Which
sort of.
I can understand why that creates a sort of complex.
Yes. But okay, so that is the overview of the first 8 arcs of Worm. So we went on a little bit longer than we expected. So I think we'll have to rush a little bit through these last parts and hopefully try to finish this with under 3 hours.
Ooh, okay.
I think in the future we'll just cover less beats. Yeah. I think then the next overview might also be really long anyway because so this book was 300,000 words.
The next one is the longest, one is right?
350,000. It's the longest of the 6. So we shall see how that turns out. But okay, so Clarence, do you want to talk about the book as a whole?
So the book as a whole was, I really, just the concept of it was so fleshed out in terms of like plot construction and like pulling a bunch of different threads all the way through. Is that like, I didn't feel like we kind of abandoned different things, too fully. Like there was enough like ambiguity in the ones that like, that Wildbow like left kind of loose. Like there's enough room to like expand, but it kind of progressed really well. And then there was all those wonderful little moments of like details and observations and like all those moments that like made everything so much more tangible. I loved all of those. Those were phenomenal.
Yeah. I think Worm is just I don't know. You go in with some expectations, and slowly over time, it's revealed more and more that only the good expectations are the ones that are there. Only the expectations for cool superhero fights, yes, those stay. But all the expectations of like powers being silly or the emphasis actually being on the superhero fights, kind of go away as you go on. And especially like I'm really happy with this. Particularly this, book division, arcs 1 through 8, I think is the best divided book. Because arc 8 really does feel like, okay, so now that you've learned all this stuff about this world, now you're going to kind of see like what this world is truly like, right? Yeah. We're going to drop all the stuff about, what society is like, and we're going to show you what it's like as a parahuman, what true conflict is, and how dangerous this world is.
Yeah, it seems like it really like kind of sets it up for the next moment.
Yes, which I'm very excited for you to read.
I'm so anxious too.
We'll see how pulling out the key moments will be for me. I do not know. So I'm not sure how much we didn't already cover.
Of my speculations?
No,
or listener questions?
I guess I don't know. Of just the book as a whole. I also want to point out how like it really feels that Wildbow is like finding his stride over the course of these 8 arcs. I think by 8 he definitely has.
There's definitely much more of like a rhythm.
Yes.
Than in some of the earlier ones.
I think it's like the first 4 that are the most stumblingly, but they're not even like. I mean, I still really like the beginning, so it's not like it's it's like a high bar that gets raised higher, right? So let's go to Clarence's speculations, and then we'll go to questions for Clarence, and then we'll close out.
Hurrah!
So Clarence, after having read the first 8 arcs, what are some of your speculations for the future?
I have many. Particularly, I feel like, in terms of like immediate, kind of moving forward, I feel like just in the conversation between Taylor and Lisa, it seems like she's going to like strike out on her own and kind of like try to do this sort of, not necessarily like overturn of the system and kind of like breaking of the status quo, but it seems like she wants to find some way to kind of, address the problems that nobody else seems to be wanting to address.
Sure.
I don't know how that's going to happen. I kind of hope that the birdcage will appear, because I feel like that is a great, kind of ground for some, it's a good asset for institutional reform, but, who knows?
Yeah. Who knows? So Endbringers break the rules that most other parahumans follow. What do you think they are, and why do you think they're here?
This is a large question for me, because I don't know. Like, I don't know what their motivation is. Like, I can't tell if it's, like, malevolent or, like, calculated, of, like choosing particular cities, where it's kind of this coordinated thing that they're kind of, that there's like a overarching plan, or if it's just, like, a byproduct of their nature that they kind of are just kind of going about, and they don't really, I don't know. Like, I can't tell if it's just kind of because they are what they are, or if it's like they have a more defined reason.
Sure.
Yes, they're tricky.
What do you think was the vast thing that Miss Militia saw?
Yes, this one, it's like even beyond the Endbringers, this kind of vastness, which, I don't know, it seems like it's like not even, it's what I was wondering before, I think, of like what about, how much of humanity is left in particular parahumans, or if it's something else, something beyond. I don't know.
Sure. Do you have any long-term predictions?
So this is based on past, I guess, superhero tropes, or just in general. Like, I feel like characters sometimes return unexpectedly, so I'm kind of hoping that her mother does. But I mean, who knows? You never know with those things.
Sure, yeah. Before we move on to listener questions, where do you think powers come from?
This is the one that I have been thinking about a lot, because it's like, I don't think it's like, it's very like individually based. But then there's like all these different levels to it. So it's like, what if there's something that has come and like is kind of imbuing people, or like, I don't know. I can't tell if it's like externally or like internally motivated. Or if it's like,
indeed.
Yes. I don't know if perhaps it has something to do with the vast thing that Miss Militia saw.
Anything else?
I don't know. There's mostly just question marks.
Sure, yeah. Question marks around a lot of things. Okay. So the next section is the questions for Clarence. So under the discussion thread for our announcement post, we had some questions. So in the discussion thread for this episode, we'll be recording the Perceptions episode before this episode comes out. So post your questions for the next book. So you'll post your questions for Clarence, and then the episode after next will be the next overview episode, where he'll answer those. And you can also post your themes and theories as well, starting now, for the next Perceptions episode as well. And you'll also have another chance to do that in that's in the discussion thread for the Perception episode as well. So so just start thinking about what questions you want Clarence to answer in arcs 9 through 14, and what themes and various. When I say themes and theories, I'm thinking more like headcanons and stuff like that, rather than first time reader theories, but background stuff. Of course, with your questions and your discussions, keep them, spoilers for Clarence, and, we'll try not to lead his speculations on too much, right? But okay, so Also Avin asks, what do you think about the sudden shift in scope we see in Arc 8? How does it change your expectations for the rest of the story?
I think the widening of the scope really kind of... I feel like it sets the tone of this could definitely happen more, again, a lot.
Mm-hmm. More, again, a lot.
I mean, just in terms of, like, the way the battle was conducted.
Yes.
Additionally, the way the battle was described, I think, kind of that, like, what I was talking about, where it's, like, this bouncing back and forth of, like, how large the battle is, but then we get those small moments. It makes it seem like that sort of, like, large-scale battle could definitely be a recurring situation. Especially if she's, like, going around... perhaps doing some institutional reform. If she does, who knows? Sure.
They also ask, what are your thoughts on the interlude format and how it expands and or foreshadows the story?
The format I really like, because it even if there's not necessarily like a moment of rest within the interlude, it kind of by its very nature creates that. And then we get a lot of, explanation and exploration of storylines and pieces of the world that we would not see if it was just Taylor. And we get a lot of different kinds of perspectives. Because like all the information that we're given of like a lot of the kind of like this expository sort of stuff is from Taylor. So I think kind of getting other people's perspectives really kind of, opens our eyes, I think, to the rest of the world.
Yeah. So Cohen asks, many of the characters introduced in arcs 1 through 8 became fan favorites throughout the community. Why/how was Wildbow so effective at characterizing them?
I think because there was so much, like there is so much space in writing kind of this novel, instead of like the character development that has to happen in like a film or like a comic, like there's so much more room in terms of like the amount of language used. I think there is that space to develop characters. And then also Wildbow is just very good at kind of making them memorable, even in a moment, that they all kind of like stay in your mind and you're like, I don't know. They're all like notable in their own way, I suppose.
Sure. This is a question from me right now. Who's your favorite character right now?
Rachel.
Okay,
yes.
Great. Cool.
I mean, she was also like immediately.
That's wonderful. Yes. Well,
not immediately, but like
I'm
immediately
sure.
when I met her, I was like, yes.
Even with at the first meeting with the biting Rachel, the dogs, and Rachel,
because she was cool. She seemed
Taylor,
so cool. Like I love the one. Like I love characters that like seem really tough, but like are also very like soft. On the inside, full of emotion. I mean, not soft, but like emotional.
Yes, those are wonderful. Yes. Okay. Vladislav asks, what do you think about how the story tackles very real social problems? For example, criminal gangs varying from Empire 88's with a very real premise to a more fantastical lungs. I am a dragon. You are now Asian. ABB.
I think it feels a lot more like the weight of it, of like the very real social problems, but then also like this more fantastical, the implications of both I think are felt like within the world. Like we get a lot of that from Taylor. Like she articulates a lot of the very like tangible aspects of it.
Yeah, the like the gangs are in her school.
Yeah.
Like there's signs and such.
We feel that like it doesn't feel like kind of abstract or like far away. Like it's very much we see the material complications of all of this.
Yeah. Rid Tom asks, in terms of superpowered societies, is there something unique about how Worm presents it compared to other modern interpretations? How would you define this difference if this is so?
I think it Worm definitely presents it differently because of all of those like social precedents that we see, where it's like they have the cities like prepared, and like that kind of dynamic between the heroes and villains is already established, and like those rules, those unspoken rules are already, are established, and then also Taylor is able to articulate them, and Lisa's are able to articulate them. And then also like the database that like Taylor can just go to and online. Go to the library and like, research all of this. So much so that she's like able to like pull from that database of knowledge in the middle of a fight. Just kind of the amount of knowledge, I think, and information gathering is much more like fleshed out. Which I think that's also additionally like why so many of the characters, like, we like them so much, is because we have that information about them. The information in the database, yeah. So we have that things? Like background information already established, and then like then we interact with them, and it's like, here they are. It's just there's like an added depth to them, even if it's just like a small moment. Yeah, and I mean that's less time having to spend on that sort of thing. So we had multiple users. Both Vladislav and also Evan both asked about Tattletale's cops and robbers idea, asking if you agree, what does it say about Lisa and the world, if her theory is correct, and what if it isn't? And then Vladislav also compared Tattletale's theory about cops and robbers with Legend's "This is why society tolerates us" speech before the Endbringer fight. Like, are they different, same size, different sides of the same coin, and other things like that. Basically, there's a lot to talk about here. There is, and it's also like it's the way that they've set it up. Like, I think that kind of dynamic between cops and robbers, of like, one, they both need the other to exist. This sort of like they define themselves based on the like not being the other. Where it's like, I'm a hero because I'm not a villain, or I'm a villain because I'm not a hero. And kind of those, but then at the same time, it's like, I am also that because I automatically will fight, the hero, or I will fight the villain. Like, all of those, like, kind of ways that dynamic works. I think the cops and robbers description really kind of fills it in. Which, I mean, I was going on immediately, like, when I read this, that it had that kind of, like, Michel Foucault, who's, like, this French theorist, I guess you could say. I don't know. I don't know how to describe Foucault. Literary theory is all mixed up with, like, philosophers, and it's the line is not very clear. But, like, he like, has this whole, theory about, like, that dynamic of, like, the police needing, and like the institution of the police like needing crime in order to exist, to do stuff, and that like they create the conditions for individuals to become like lifelong criminals in order for like both of them to like, for the institution of like governmental policing to exist. So it's like they like justify themselves, I guess, with this kind of like tentative kind of, social balance, I guess. Yeah. To relate it to Legend's bit, so Legend's speech, right, is focused on this is why society tolerates us, right? Because of there's Endbringer attacks, they tolerate us because we're the only ones that can fight the Endbringers. And that's interesting because this is in kind of an opposition to Tattletale's cops and robbers thing, right? Cops and robbers is why do heroes let villains go? And Legend is why does society tolerate any parahumans, not just heroes and villains? And so it's interesting because it's like, would Legend say the same thing? Does Legend say the same thing? This is why society tolerates us when talking about heroes versus villains. Like, villains are why society tolerates heroes. Yeah, it's kind of this. That is also interesting because we don't have the perspective of the civilian. Like, we don't know what they're like, what people think about them. besides we get a couple of glimpses of like this sort of like celebrity sort of thing, but there is
the celebrity sort of thing that we see does align with Tattletale's Cops and Robbers. So that heroes are just like the local, the local sports team. But like there's a danger to it, like where it's like almost like an appeasing sort of thing of like they have more power than us. So it's like, I don't know. Yeah, and I mean like in Tattletale's speech, right? She talks about how it's harmless fun, right? The banks are insured, there's stuff like that. And it's like, okay, I can maybe excuse stuff like the bank robbery where
there's a lot of like non-harmless, very harmful fun.
Yeah, I mean the interlude before that arc is Victoria and Amy, where we see how one of the criminals in Empire 88, a superpowered gang, mercilessly beat up this woman. And I mean, like, there's a superpower team of Nazis that definitely do kill people. Bakuda kills people,
it's not,
right?
It's not like
and yes, the Cops and Robbers thing, like the society did team up against that line being crossed of Bakuda, blowing up the whole city. It wouldn't have gone after her if she just killed Park Jae-hoo.
It's very much
right?
like
I'm sure of it.
They're willing to look past any sort of violence or any sort of like, like cruelty that doesn't break those rules that they've set out. They really only act when it's like when their unspoken, kind of logics have been broken, like with the Coyle and like with Bakuda.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. When the status quo is like very much rocked, not just like murder is within the status quo. I think
absolutely.
So, Vladislav also asked, when it comes to wards who are both expected to be underage law enforcers and are used as child soldiers during an Endbringer attack, is this necessary when dealing with both adults? Is this society tolerating us thing necessary when dealing with both adults and teenagers who all have different equivalents of firearms on them that they can't discard?
That is a really interesting. I didn't even think about that in terms of like the Endbringer attack of like. I mean, they're like teenagers, that they're.
I mean, just in general, like if during the Ward's Interlude 2, right? Like, do children need to be fighting crime? Like,
I don't. That does seem kind of not grand, because like you see it, like they haven't fully developed their like or like solidified their like moral grounding, I guess. You know what I mean? Like teenagers, like that's kind of what it's all about at that point, is like you're figuring everything out and you're making mistakes, and like it seems like a hazard to have people who are very prone to kind of like that sort of like growth in life or death situations.
Yeah. The last angle on that question, how do you think the Cops and Robbers idea reflects on Lisa?
It's also that is she, because I suppose in that moment we don't realize it when she's like articulating it, but she's also kind of like justifying her previous actions of like kind of messing with the shop person clerk. Yes, thank you. Where she's kind of not really thinking about, I suppose, the extent of her words, I guess. Because she kind of she fits into she knows how to follow those specific rules. And she doesn't really seem inclined to kind of step back and acknowledge. I don't know.
Yeah, she doesn't want to be seen as a bad person, I think. Okay. I think that is all the commentary we have this week for our overview episode. Only 3 hours of stuff of arcs 1 through 8. So next week is going to be our perspectives episode where Clarence and I are going to be presenting some character studies, some essays on these arcs, and just some other little bits and stuff. And hopefully we'll basically cover everything that, well, not everything.
Language is not totalitizing.
This is some of the things that we didn't focus on this time. Yes. Yes. Don't. It's not possible to talk about everything. Then the week after is going to be our overview episode for episodes 9 through 14. So as I said before, you guys can start leaving your questions for Clarence and your themes and theories for those arcs in the comments of this thread and the next one. And the thread will be in the description. Okay. All right. So just to talk about some other stuff that is going on in Doof Media. The first thing you guys will want to know, obviously, as your Worm readers, you like Wildbow. As you might already know, We've Got Ward had their finale last week. What you may not know is that this last Wednesday, 2 days before this episode comes out, a secret episode came out, an interview with Wildbow. So Scott and Matt sat down with Wildbow and had a long conversation. It does contain Ward spoilers, which is why I haven't listened to it yet. But I have heard it was great. So you guys can go listen to that. Also, for those who may not know, Wildbow was also interviewed during All Packed Up, the Deep Impact 24-hour live stream. So if you've read Packed, you can go listen to that, which is in the now renamed Pale Reflections podcast feed. And of course, last tidbit of information, if you've been out of the loop on Wildbow stuff for a while, you may want to know that Wildbow's newest work, Pale, has just begun. At the time of release, there's probably, 5 or 6 episodes out? Or chapters, I mean. And I'm loving it so far. I'm kind of hoping that it becomes the new entry point where, like, Worm has always been the entry point to the fandom. I'm hoping that Pale becomes another one, as it's supposed to be a shorter work. Yeah.
That does seem... I've begun reading it. I like it so far as well. So if you like what we do here at Doof Media, consider donating a single $1 per month or whatever else you can afford. And it's due to the generosity of our patrons that we're able to create shows like this. Patron dollars are what pays our hosting fees and how we're able to purchase, like, this microphone I'm using.
You can go to patreon.com/doofmedia to see all the patron rewards we have. Arguably, the best one starts at the $1 level, which is access to the Doof Discord, where Clarence and I and the rest of the Doofcast and all of our wonderful patrons hang out. I actually really like it there. It's a really nice place. Just such a nice, pleasant community. And we talk about a lot of things. I'm really, really proud to be part of that Discord, actually. So highly recommend that. If you want to reach out to us, you can, of course, comment in our discussion thread. You can also send us an email at decomposingpodcast@gmail.com. I was very proud to get that Gmail. It's very cool sounding. We are the Decomposing Podcast. That's really cool.
It's a good one.
Yeah, I think so. And of course, consider sending us or giving us a rating review on, iTunes, on Google Podcasts, Google Play Podcasts, whatever it's called, Stitcher, or wherever else you listen, because those really, really do help. Next week is our perspectives episode for this book. By the time this episode comes out, it will already have been recorded because we can't read book 2 until we record that episode. So we want to give ourselves extra time, given that it's 350,000 words. We won't be able to address audience questions until the next overview episode, but we'd love to hear what you guys thought of this. That's all we have for y'all this week. So join us next week on our perspective episode.
Where we'll use literary theory to delve deeper into Worm's unexplored themes.